Welcome, everyone, to our sixth annual Autonomous Vehicles in the City Conference. It's our first conference back since 2019, when we last did our last in-person conference. So we've got close to 100 people here in the audience, and we have many, many more watching around the world online. So thank you for being here. We have a fantastic lineup today, and our trajectory is going to be talking about some of the work that USF has been doing with some of the real-world deployments that are happening here in San Francisco. And we're going to hear from our partner in that, the people that we've been actually getting some data from, Cruise at the end of the day. But we'll talk a little bit about our work to start off with, and then we're going to hear from a number of other experts. You'll have a chance to talk with them, hopefully out in a little 30-minute coffee talk or coffee time we will have in a little bit. Sorry for those of you online, but next time you'll have to be here for our yummy coffee. But we'll focus on a little bit on where the technology is, how we can synergize to make sure that we uphold the public good, and then we do the best for the best outcomes for our cities. And then we'll talk a little bit about AI and smart vehicles, and we'll hear from companies that are really at the edge of some things called of smart data, of digital twin, of really traffic management. So we'll talk a little more in a highly granular way about the data and the data technology behind things. So I think you're in for a lot of great education and a lot of great information today. But first, I have the pleasure of welcoming our new dean, Otgo. And Otgo, hold on a minute, because I want to tell everyone how impressive you are. Dean Otgo Erhamjams. Otgo is a professor and the dean at University of San Francisco. She has degrees in a variety of fields, including information technology, economics, and finance. And her research interests have really spanned a number of disciplines, from banking and risk management and insurance to corporate finance, and what I'm proud of, which is ESG and corporate responsibility, sustainable and social impact investing. Otgo, she's written multiple leading books in global business and economics, and is passionate about integrating STEM into our curriculum. And I think she's really, since she's been here, she's really championed, and over her career, she's really championed addressing grand challenges that we're facing as a planet, as well as kind of thorny and wicked problems that we have to come together for as both public and private sector individuals. So she's passionate about leading this school, University of San Francisco School of Management, towards a focus on ESG and the UN SDGs, which is directly aligned with this event. So I'm so happy to welcome you, Dean Otgo. And so without further ado, maybe you can join me in welcoming her. Thank you.
Thank you, Billy. That was very generous. Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Welcome to the 6th Annual Autonomous Vehicles Conference. Today, we're excited to talk about innovation, entrepreneurship, and building the economically prosperous, sustainable, and just cities of the future. Today, you will hear from those developing autonomous solutions and challenges that these new solutions bring. This technology offers great promise in how we can plan and manage the future of cities and regions, particularly in light of the grand challenges and wicked problems our planet faces. Planning for and accelerating innovation that crosses both the public and private sectors is paramount if we're gonna address these issues and achieve the benchmarks that have been put forward in the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And transportation is a large component of how we can help address things like access to employment, food, healthcare, housing, and social mobility. At USF School of Management, we're committed to training the future leaders who will advance the ESG goals that will help address this, providing not only the entrepreneurial and investment approach, but the interface with the public sector, working to shape the infrastructure and the built environment to promote the public good. The Autonomous Vehicles and City Initiative provides that forum, looking at how we can foresee the future of the digital city and discussing the impacts and policy implications, including the new technology, economies and innovation, but also the same issues of environmental quality and climate currently being discussed in Egypt at Climate Change Conference. As the new dean, I'm thrilled to continue this conversation in work and that USF can lead this multidisciplinary dialogue. And now let me turn the mic over to your host, Professor William Riggs, who leads our Autonomous Vehicles and Innovate for Good initiatives, who will provide an overview of the day. Thank you for being here and hope you enjoy the wonderful program we have for you today. Welcome and onward.
Michael.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Argo. And that was a very good, and I think that you framed things really well there in terms of kind of the big picture of where we're going. So I want to invite two of our grad students up now, and what we're going to do is really kind of frame things based on some work that we've done recently with Cruz. Maybe what I'll do is, we're going to have a number of speakers you'll hear from today, and I do want to actually thank, we did have some sponsors, and I'll thank them right now and again at the end, but we have Cruz, Atmos Financial, Waymo, and Planetizen that provided some funding for this conference, and thank you for that. We've been able to provide some nice refreshments as a result, and our live streaming as well. But as we go forward, I really want to frame things by kind of grounding us in what's happening out there. So without further ado, I want to invite Shannon Mark and Nathan Karkowski up here. So Shannon is actually in our MSEI program, our Masters of Entrepreneurship and Engineering. Yeah, let's hear it for them. And both of them have been working on a research project where we've been evaluating some of the rides that Cruise has been offering in the city. And Nathan is in our Masters of Public Administration program. And so without that further ado, why don't I turn it over to the two of you to kind of explain what we've been doing.
Thanks, Professor Riggs. Good afternoon, everyone. As we've touched on, we were very fortunate to partner with Cruise on the pilot program. And basically, the idea was to get autonomous vehicles out into the public, obviously a sample size that we worked with, to see how people would behave when they have access to this as a form of transport. So basically, Cruise, I'm sure lots of people have seen these vehicles around all over the area here. And the idea is that it's a ride share, completely autonomous electric vehicles, obviously providing a transport service to the people of San Francisco. And some big news was in June 2022, this year, they actually received their final permit, which allows them to provide a service of autonomous driving and actually charge a fare for it as well. So Cruise, as I've touched on, obviously zero emission, completely green energy, self-driving, and the idea is to provide a shared service for transporters within San Francisco. With regards to the permits, it's been a long time working with the DMV and the Public Utilities Commission, 7 years to be specific. And as I mentioned, the big permit was finally received June this year, which obviously paves the way for the entire industry going forward. So just to set the stage, the trial actually operated under the ODD, which is the Operational Design Domain. And the idea behind that is that there's set rules with regards to the area. We refer to it as the dog in the transit community. As you can see, the area itself does depict a dog in shape. But it also speaks about the roads that are allowed to be traveled on, the weather conditions, speed limits, and most importantly, actually the time of day. So the trial was actually operated between 10:30 p.m. and 5 a.m. In terms of our riders, we try to get a diverse group of riders, and that included people living on campus and off campus. Majority of them were actually off campus to give it as realistic display of the general public as possible. So as we would expect, the primary purpose of rides during the day were for things like school, work, and then as you go to the later times in the evening, after 10 p.m., majority of it was for social activities. So in terms of what the current transport that riders were using well, during the day it was things like public transport, walking, a bit of driving themselves, and then in the evening it actually transferred to using more of your ride shares, like your Lyfts or your Ubers, and then actually driving themselves. The students that we interviewed all made comments that they thought transit connectivity, good service distribution, and taking into account people with disabilities is vitally important in terms of how we introduce AVs as a form of transport service. The biggest question that keeps coming up is whether AVs will come in as a complement or a supplement to the current transit options available. And the early data from our rider trial actually came up that over 50% of these trips would replace things like rideshare for important tasks such as errands, work, or school, which is obviously very promising. In terms of the riders that we interviewed, 76% of them mentioned that these trips would have been done otherwise. So this is vitally important. We're not putting more vehicles on the road. They would have taken the likes of Uber or Lyft or other rideshare options, with 55% of them actually mentioning they would have used rideshare. So this is obviously very important information in terms of how AVs can be leveraged. In terms of the travel for the autonomous vehicles, as we expected, a large majority of it was for things like social events, because it was obviously in the evening hours. But surprisingly, around about 20% was for things like work, school, errands. It's also really interesting information that we collected. And then I'm now going to pass on to Nathan. Nathan was actually involved in the trial himself. He was one of the riders that participated. So he's going to give a bit of an idea of what it was like being one of the riders on the trial.
Shannon, thank you. As you can see here on the graph, we've got quite a few factors influencing people's decisions, with cost being the largest driving factor right now, followed by reliable service. It's going to be there. You're not going to have someone canceling a ride on you, all of those challenges. And then safer alternative. One of my cohorts or a good friends from school, she was relaying some of her experiences, ones I have not had as a male rider. She had shared stories of riding in vehicles with drivers she felt less than safe with. So having an autonomous vehicle transport you elevates that level of safety she'll be able to experience in her life. And then certainly, last but not least, and very worth mentioning, is the don't want to drink and drive. We want to make this world a safer place, and that's a pretty good motivator if you ask me. Sometimes getting out where I live, there's not a whole lot of real good direct bus service, and certainly the fact that cruise vehicles are available is pretty darned awesome. Something I had relayed to Billy in some of our early interviews. Huge fan of the technology. It is a heck of a lot of fun to watch these vehicles cruising around, pun intended right there. Have been watching the industry grow for quite a few years here in San Francisco. All very exciting stuff, and I was as giddy as heck when I had my first ride. Just couldn't take my eyes off of that empty driver's seat, and was just fascinated by all of the processing that had to be happening in the background to literally make that right turn and zip down Geary Street. With that, Shannon, back to you.
Thanks so much, Nathan. So just to wrap up, if anyone does have any questions that they'd like to ask us, we will obviously be here for the rest of the day. At that link, you can find a bit more info into a more full report in terms of the rider trial and the results of the same trial. And yeah, that's basically what we've been working on. We're looking forward to continuing our research and our involvement in this whole space. Thanks so much.
We're gonna do a little photo, guys. Again, we gotta look at these green vehicles here. All right, thanks. That was really good. That's really good.
Really surprised.
Yeah, really surprised. All right, just here for this, our master's students again in the public administration program and the entrepreneurship and innovation program. So, and if you want more information on those programs, go to our website. So, really, so what I want to do is really just kind of move us forward and maybe invite our first panel up to talk about some stuff. So our trajectory today is really going to be focused on the vehicles and the infrastructure first. And then we're going to pivot over to kind of the data and AI side of things. So I think we've got a really great lineup for you. So maybe I can have Martin, Alante, and I think Dan might still be in the back. Maybe somebody can go grab him too. Oh, there he is. And we can come on up. I'm going to stand at the podium on this one. So find a chair, any chair, and we will get started. So don't be shy, Dan. I don't bite. All right, so thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. In the spirit of, are we gonna? Yeah, we'll do that again. So, in the spirit of kind of giving organic introductions, I actually haven't had a chance to meet all of you except for you, Eliza. So it's really welcome to you, and I know some of what you're working on. So I look forward to hearing more. So I'd like to hear kind of from you. Maybe you could introduce yourself and kind of what you're doing in the automated and autonomous vehicle space, who you're working for, and maybe a little bit about your history in this industry and other industries. So Elisa, why don't we just put you on the spot and go, from the audience left to right?
Sure. Is this on? I'm guessing it's on.
Are we good on the sound here? No, okay. All right. Yeah, go for it. But you really got to put it up to your face.
My name is Eliza Paz. I'm a principal planner at the SFCTA. I'm leading our autonomous vehicle shuttle pilot on Treasure Island. It's been under development for quite a few years. We received funding from USDOT, MTC, and also our local Prop K funds to do this pilot. It's one of the first applications of a shared shuttle service on public roads in California, so that's really exciting and a big milestone. And it's also an opportunity for us to test autonomous vehicles in a shared, more public environment compared to, the private testing that we see all over San Francisco. The pilot is really focused on data and research, so we do have really clear goals and evaluation processes. And we're also, through our outreach process, we heard from our board the need to understand workforce and labor and education opportunities through this pilot. So we've integrated a partnerships program working with education groups, workforce and labor to understand, how AVs will also bring benefits to workforce and local businesses and, the local community here as well.
Before we hand it over to Alante, maybe Elisa, just so we don't acronym it up too much. The SFCTA is
great question. San Francisco County Transportation Authority.
Yes, we in the transportation we get into transportation speak and jargon quite a lot. So, and then. But how long have you been? Can you tell us how long you've been at the CTA and kind of?
Sure.
You're a planner there.
I am a planner, so I work in our planning division. I've been at the SFCTA for about 2 years. Before that, I was a consultant, so I've worked kind of all over California, parts of the country, parts of the world, doing new mobility and really focusing on mode shift, TDM, transportation demand management. So those are kind of my areas of expertise.
Awesome.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alante Whitmore, and I'm the director of the Autonomous Vehicle Initiative at SAFE. And SAFE is based in D.C., and we are a transportation policy research organization. And so as a director, I'm responsible for helping us continue to do policy research to create political will for federal policy framework for autonomous vehicles, but also helping to articulate all the social and economic benefits of the technology. We actually started in around 2014. I was not there yet. I was probably barely a lowly graduate student at the time. A little bit of background, I just completed a joint PhD in civil engineering and engineering and public policy at Carnegie Mellon University. And I spent that time looking at how we can improve access through autonomous vehicles, specifically sharing them in sharing autonomous vehicles and integrating them with public transit. So I'm always thinking about all the ways that AVs are a tool for increasing access and making our world better and giving people better access to workforce opportunities, social opportunities, any services they need. And actually a bit before that, I actually was an ag engineer. So I used to do a lot of biofuel research, and electrification happened, which is a beautiful thing, but then an educational opportunity happened with AVs that led me down this path. So really excited to be a part of this conversation today.
That's great. And I'm supposed to remind folks watching online, there's a lot of them, that you can submit questions on the live stream. So please do that. We want to hear from you, and the staff will bring up those questions to me as we proceed. Martin.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Martin Searhouse, and I head up the research center for Nissan and the Alliance, which is the Renault-Nissan-Mitsubishi Alliance in Santa Clara. I created the center in 2013. We work on everything that has to do with mobility, from level 2 to level 4 autonomy, from connected cars, from CV to X, from smart city, as well as material science. We have a large research organization, and I'm very proud to say that we're also doing advanced engineering. So our work actually goes into product, which is very exciting. Yeah, so that's please check it out. How a little bit of background, right? So background, yeah.
And also tell us a little bit about the i680 stuff.
About the what?
The i680 stuff, huh?
The i680 stuff. Okay. Yeah. So your competitor in Contra Costa, we actually are working very closely together with the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. We're having funding from them to work on safety on the roads with CV to X, so connected and 5G and cloud AI. So we're making intersections intelligent. And connecting that to our vehicles and to pedestrians and bicyclists. And then we're also doing work on traffic management in terms of congestion on 680. One of the things that we're working together with UC Berkeley on this and Vanderbilt University. Nissan will have a 100-car pilot next week with Vanderbilt University in Tennessee. And we're actually doing, I would say, a follow-up on this, where we actually say if 10% of the vehicles could be controlled, their ADAS, so their ACC, the autonomous cruise control, if we can control that car with about 10% penetration, we could eliminate a lot of the harmonization on the highways and therefore reduce traffic jams and stuff. And
maybe let's come back to that a little bit in one of the questions.
Yeah, sorry, I'm going right in there.
Diving right in.
But that's what we're doing. A little bit of background, I'm actually an AI guy, worked for more than 13 years as a senior scientist at NASA Ames on human robots going to Mars. I built software that runs in mission control for the space station, and then started my own company here in San Francisco that I still have in healthcare. And then Nissan came to ask me to start a research center, and I said no. And then they say, really? And I said, yes. And then they said, really? And then finally I said, okay. So that's basically my background. I also worked at Xerox PARC for a while and, did some other stuff. So originally from the Netherlands, though. So my alma mater is the University of Amsterdam. So in case go check it out there. Cool city.
All right. Dan?
Great. Thank you very much. Great to be here. I want to talk to you a little bit more. I drove my Nissan Leaf up to San Francisco today.
Love this guy already.
So excited to hear a little bit more about that. Dan Mitchell, I work for Nuro. Nuro is an autonomous vehicle company focused on building a novel design vehicle with 0 occupants just for delivery services. And so Neuro's been around for about 6 years now. We actually have built and designed the vehicle and have it running as part of our testing operations, as well as deployment with a number of our partners working on delivery services with these autonomous vehicles and technology. Really excited to talk more about one of those use cases. Saw a little bit about the cruise services, and a lot of people there listed, deliveries or shopping is one of the reasons why they use autonomous vehicles. This is a very specific use case part of that, but we believe it's one of the first use cases that is going to be really widely commercially available to a lot of people. And so that's what Neuro is focused on. My role at Neuro, I work on the city and community engagement side. That means engaging with city governments, local officials, and members of the community about what our vehicles are doing when they test in the neighborhood, how we can all work together to keep our streets safe, whether that's autonomous vehicles or personally driven vehicles, or in fact, vulnerable road users as well. We all share the road. It's part of all of our responsibilities as part of road safety there. As well as, lots of folks have questions about these vehicles, like law enforcement officials. And so working with those specific individuals and groups, specifically about our deployment and testing on the roadways, and how these vehicles can hopefully have a positive impact on the cities and communities where we all live and work.
And we should clarify that you, as a Neuro, have one of these said permits to run your vehicles on the public roads, right?
We do, yeah. So we have the permit to commercially deploy our autonomous vehicles, and actually have done so. We have live delivery services happening in Mountain View, California today with 7-Eleven, one of our delivery partners there.
And just so because we have a lot of students in the audience, how did you end up at a company called Neuro?
So I had a prior career actually doing political campaign work, so was traveling around the country doing a little political stuff. If you haven't yet voted, please go out and vote tomorrow. And then I was at business school at UCLA, and from there kind of launched my career in startups and technology, actually starting a child transportation service, Uber for Kids type service, where parents could book a ride via app, and we would send over a school bus or a personal vehicle to go pick up those kids and take them to where they want to go. Working with autonomous vehicles is actually a lot easier than working and figuring out how to move a first grader from school to dance class. But that was a lot of fun and helped set me up for success here at Neuro.
I did not know that. That's a really cool story. I learned a little bit myself. Well, maybe what I'd like to do to kind of kick us off first is to really focus on kind of where we are with the actual technology. And I feel like maybe to get your all's read, because and maybe Martin, we can start with you, because you mentioned this idea of your ACC, and so where are we with kind of a lot of these vehicles that are out there on the roads today? And I know, Dan, you can talk a little bit about your accoutrements. We don't have crews up here to talk about what they're using on their vehicles from a hardware standpoint, but Prashante may be able to talk about that a little later. But maybe, Martin, you could just start and give us a flavor for how Nissan's approaching the technical challenge of, and maybe we could do a primer for those of us that don't know, how does an autonomous vehicle actually see and know the environment around? It's like the Force, right?
Yeah. It's a tough question to answer, I feel always, because there is what we're all working towards, which is the Holy Grail, and Cruise is reaching it, right? With driving in San Francisco, I think a difficult city to drive in. But today's vehicles from the OEMs, from the car manufacturers, are not at that level yet, right? Because there's many reasons for it. But if we start with what we've realized, I would say about 5-7 years ago, is that the technology that we're working on level 4 could actually be applied at level 2 first, right? And that's what you see happening in the industry today. But if you go to level 4, you need to have, quote unquote, perfect vision. And so perception is, for autonomous driving, I think the hard part that you need to to really solve in order to drive, without a driver in the car. And so the sensors on the car could be lidars and cameras and radars, and then you need to have the AI software to observe what you see in the world. How can you bring what is in the world into, quote unquote, the memory of the computer? And that really is the hard problem. And it's not just detecting, the pedestrian or the bicyclist or the vulnerable road user and other drivers. It's predicting what is going to happen in the next 3 to 6 seconds, right? In order to be anticipating what the difficult situation might be and what you do. So perception is all the way from the raw data coming in from the sensors to figuring out what is happening on the road and then predicting what is going to happen. And based on that, now you have to make your right decision. And this is the hard part, I say. And for the OEMs, there are a number of problems that we face. And I would say the first hard problem is how much are you willing to pay, for those sensors? And it turns out not very much, and if you and for you to realize, and I myself, I'm not a car guy. I've been, actually on February we have our 10th year anniversary, so I've been at the company 10 years in February. But what I didn't realize is that every dollar that is added to the price of a car is scrutinized in the company, right? Because it really is to bring the best experience for the lowest price. And if you have a LiDAR that costs $40,000, and now of that they come down and they cost $20,000, and then some of them come down from China and they're $10,000. But that's still a lot of money to add to a vehicle, and that's just a sensor, right? So this is the hard thing that the car manufacturers have to deal with, and that's why you see this technology not being, full-fledged out, which was everybody was believing. When I started in 2013, 2022, we're going to have self-driving vehicles. Well, it's a little too early, I think.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I would underscore that. The economics and the ownership model really matter, and it matters, the outcome matters too, right? How the vehicle will be utilized and how it will be utilized on a people mile standpoint, not a vehicle mile standpoint. So how many people can we put in the vehicle and how many miles can we go with multiple people in the vehicle? So it's,
and let me just jump in here because I think what we can clarify, the end customer is not willing to pay $10,000 or $20,000 more for that. But us as sometimes autonomous vehicle makers, we are willing to pay, and that's why you see most autonomous vehicle companies will have LiDAR sensors and other types of sensors on the vehicle. One that you didn't mention was a thermal imaging camera, which is something Neuro has incorporated onto our vehicles, especially to protect those, again, vulnerable road users, where a thermal camera can do a really good job of detecting a person or animal out in the roadway, especially when maybe a camera sensor at night isn't going to do as good of a job doing that. But what we do is then we amortize that cost over all of the deliveries we're doing, right? So maybe your delivery is increasing 1 cent, 2 cents, 3 cents, because this is a shared vehicle. This is a vehicle that a lot of people will be utilizing for delivery, and that safety is so important that we're willing to spend the money up front to put that type of sensor on the vehicle and then increase the utilization to recover those costs. And so that's something that kind of we think about as we're going through the autonomous vehicle development process.
Yeah, and maybe let's, as we, I'd be curious, particularly what Lisa, you and Alante think about this, particularly angling towards where does the public sector fit in here in terms of providing infrastructure that supports the technology? Because I think what we're getting at here too is that if we want to see more public deployments, are there things that the public sector can bring to the table to ensure optimal outcomes and things like that? But I think we should make sure we define the term level 2, which you used, and level 4, just so if there's anyone in the audience that doesn't know, these are SAE.
Just Google it.
Yeah, just Google it. There's this thing called Google. It was invented a couple hot seconds ago. Level 2 vehicle basically is more or less if we see certain advanced features on cars, adaptive cruise control, lane keeping.
We say at Nissan, it's hands-on, right? So eyes off, hands-on, or hands-on and eyes off, right? That's how we define. And if you have hands off and eyes off, you're at level 4, right? So that's kind of like how we define it. But ADAS is basically that there is a driver in the loop.
And typically they go up to level 5. John Karras, the ex-CEO of Waymo, I can't pronounce his last name, so I'm not going to try. But I've heard him say level 5 is a myth because even like a human driver is not going to be able to drive in every condition in all the time. So,
I have to say, I've been yelling at these level 5 stuff since I started. Human beings can basically keep 3 categories in their mind, right? So of course engineers have to create 5. It's just like absolutely ridiculous.
Actually, there's 6 with level 0.
Of course, 6. All right.
That's like no windshield wipers, right? Alante, what do you think?
Well,
But you got to talk into the mic.
For sure. I definitely want to underscore both of you all's points about the fact that this new technology is expensive, but companies are being very creative about use cases and creating new use cases. So Neuro is definitely one great example for delivery. Also, I don't know how deep we are getting into like freight and trucking, but that's also a place where there's an application for autonomy. And then, of course, passengers. We talked about Cruise and other companies that are now using this technology and absorbing the cost and then kind of dividing it in a little bit more creative than us all owning our own vehicle. There's a lot of positive benefits to that as well. Since we are no longer having to own our own cars, I mean, personally, I've loved Uber and Lyft. I'd love for it to be electric. I'd love for it to be autonomous, where I could just go where I want to go and never drive again, and connect me to my existing public transit, of course. So I think that the technology in itself is on the road. We see it with Neuro having deployed. We see Cruise on the road. We see Waymo on the road. But as far as a more expansive deployment, there are a couple of things that need to be in place. Some things at the federal level, but I think something that cities are thinking about with the pilots is helping to kind of create inventory of what needs to be in place. And Eliza, I'm sure you're way more well-versed in what the city needs than I am, but I know the pilots are helping to inform that information.
Yeah, that's a great point. One thing we are seeing with the Treasure Island pilot is that the vehicles, from the non-technology person, they need a lot of technology, and people also need a lot of, basic infrastructure to have these vehicles work. And that infrastructure and the technology that's available, whether it's like just reliable Wi-Fi for starters, varies across communities. So, that enabling infrastructure and having it be consistent across communities, across cities, so that everyone can use these vehicles, have equally reliable service, is one of the big things that we noticed sort of early on. Another piece that I would also highlight is from the rider standpoint. We noticed that the vehicles, they vary, right? They vary in how many people they can carry, how ADA accessible they are. And from the public standpoint, all of those features come into play. And so, it's for the pilot was a really important consideration of what types of vehicles can operate in the community that we have, and also with the infrastructure that we have. Treasure Island is currently going through major redevelopment, so there's a lot of challenges there. So all of that starts coming into play.
Maybe could you tell us a little more detail about what you envision as a Treasure Island pilot? Because I think it's so new. I don't think a lot of people, even that are watching online, really know about the project.
Yeah, so Treasure Island, just for context, is this island in between San Francisco and Oakland. It's pretty small. It's about 2 miles. There's Yerba Buena Island is attached to it, so Treasure Island is very flat. Yerba Buena Island is very hilly. So the pilot that we are working on now is on Treasure Island, so the flat part of the island. It's about a 1.5 mile circulator. It would operate for 9 months, have free rides for the public. And we're working through a community outreach process to understand kind of service priorities and different community priorities so that we can shape the actual service with that community input, and also, working with SFMTA, the agency that operates the bus service, the redevelopment on the island. The island is being redeveloped to have about 8,000 new units. 27% of those would be affordable. So there's just a lot of constant changes on the island, new roadways, all of that is happening.
So maybe I can drill down a little more too,
Yeah.
because I want to understand myself a little more the vision of the project. Is it a circulator, or are these going to be door-to-door service that feeds into the municipal transit agency's buses? How do you envision that working?
Yeah, so it would be effectively a circulator on the island. One of the newer transportation changes on the island is a ferry service connecting San Francisco's ferry terminal to Treasure Island. So it would be a circulator. It would connect the ferry terminal on the island with the kind of the community destinations, supermarket, community center with island residents. So people on the island could use it sort of for their on-island trips, and also folks coming in to visit could use the shuttle as a way to get around and visit local businesses as well.
Yeah, I think so. We have a question here from the audience I want to highlight too, because the question basically talks about this idea of replacing rideshare transit trips and how's the data showing things. And I think what we're hearing from all of you is that this is a non-binary situation, and you can have situations where you're serving as a quasi, an AV is serving as a quasi transit service, and you can also have private autonomous companies that actually fill these gaps, and whether or not they're geographic or time-based gaps, that fill those gaps in the network. And I wonder, I think I've been thinking a lot about like the kind of the physical infrastructure in terms of what kind of community investment we should do to kind of make this non-binary future happen. And Alante, I'm thinking a lot about your PhD and kind of how you're thinking about service equity. And I wondered if we could start to tap into that in terms of what kinds of investments do we need to make to ensure that both public and private operators really provide the maximal service to our most vulnerable people.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So in my dissertation, I literally created kind of like a prioritization scheme of determining where in certain cities is there already an unmet transit need, so latent transit demand, and from that overlaying low-income populations, minority populations, and then prioritizing those areas for service first.
Can I stop you first? Because you said latent transport demand,
Yes.
and this is a very transportation-y term. Can we just pause and
Yes.
drill down on latent demand?
Yeah, and I started with unmet. So
Oh.
same. They're synonyms, I promise. Like just unmet demand, pretty much like if you were to live in a neighborhood that didn't have service, but you don't own a vehicle, you need transit, right?
Or you want to make a trip, but you don't have a way to make a trip.
Exactly that. So with this prioritization scheme, we are able to look at how autonomous vehicles, be it shuttles or an actual like 4 to 6 passenger vehicle, can extend, essentially give people service from that neighborhood to the existing transit, so the nearest bus stop. These are places in different cities. I looked at New York, Chicago, Minneapolis, and Pittsburgh to see like these are places that do not have transit within walking distance, no bus line or bus stop or like your rail. And so if we're able to improve the service for these individuals, we're increasing access, and we're actually increasing transit ridership, because these are individuals who would have taken transit if it was an option available to them anyway. So I think that's one really great opportunities for cities to take time, and I think a lot of cities are thinking about equity right now and prioritizing these are the areas in our cities that need service. I think that autonomous vehicle companies are hungry to show where AVs can provide positive outcomes for those who have a great need. So I think the meeting of those two are really a match made in heaven, in my opinion. And so I think that's a really great opportunity. And then there's still a lot of policy things behind that, figuring out the levers to actualize this great match.
And if I can add on to that, because something that Neuro is thinking about is these autonomous vehicles for delivery services. And, it's not that there's a new product. Delivery services, of course, exist today, right? People can use delivery services, but they're really, really expensive. And so as we're thinking about where autonomous vehicles can benefit, we can drastically reduce the cost with the autonomous vehicle. And of course, you layer on top of that the all-electric vehicles that we have with our zero-occupant Neuro vehicles. You can drastically reduce that cost, making it more accessible to folks that are currently left out of the current systems, right? If you think about the cost of a bus ticket, imagine if you just didn't have to get on the bus in the first place. You could spend that time with family. You could spend that time, with kids or friends. There's so many more things that people would love to be doing than going on that trip to the grocery store, especially if you have to take public transportation or just public transportation doesn't exist. You see people building grocery store shopping lists based on what they can carry, rather than what they actually need. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, and I want to expand with even people who live in food deserts, right? Maybe they do have access to transit, but it's a 30-minute, an hour trip just to get groceries. That is going to be such an excellent use case where they can now have access and they're not spending that time on transit.
And it's really about autonomous vehicles reducing the cost to make of that delivery services to make that available. Something you can really only do if you take that person out of the vehicle. And it's something that working with transit agencies, Neuro's looked into as well, where we have some of our delivery services right now is in Houston, Texas as well, the most diverse city in the United States. And working with our partner Kroger grocery stores there, we actually did a research pilot with Houston Metro, Houston's transit agency, working with them and their paratransit trips. So these are trips where Houston Metro needs to send out accessible vehicle to an individual's house because they can't use existing services as they exist. We'll take them to the grocery store. That trip has to be booked 24 hours in advance. Whether they show up on time is kind of up in the air, but then the person has to go do their grocery shopping and then wait for the vehicle to come back. Again, scheduled 24 hours in advance, that return trip as well, and take them back. That's really expensive for the transit agency to operate, and it's just not a great experience for the customer. And so we actually have conducted a pilot to see kind of how Neuro delivery can fill that gap, how we can perform a really good service for the customer at a really low cost. And it's something that we're really seeing some positive results there. And, that's an impact that AVs can have without any additional necessarily government funding or infrastructure, but just with kind of the widespread deployment.
Can I push back a little bit? Is that good?
That's not allowed in this forum.
Because I hear this a lot. It's like, it can be so much cheaper. And I would like to see the numbers. Amazon just stopped their delivery service robots. And I know a little bit about it. And it basically is that for 300 robots, they needed 200 people to operate the things and maintain them. And so the economics is just not there. So I wonder how Neuro can do that. And not just Neuro. I mean, so the Cruise has the same problem, right? I mean, maintenance of the vehicles, cleaning of the vehicles. Uber, in my opinion, is a great service. The drivers have their own cars. They're not employees. They maintain their cars. That's not the cost that Uber has.
Yeah,
and they still don't make money. Although now I hear that they're finally starting to go up a little bit. But so the question I have for these services is how can you make it economically available? It's not necessarily the technology. I mean, what I've found in my own life trying to build a business, it ain't the technology. The technology is not the problem. It's the business model that is really hard. And I just wonder how economics work.
Well, I'd like to, maybe you could talk a little more, and let's drill down on the kind of I would say the cost sharing approach that the I-680 project is. When you talked about the ACC, this idea of like this lightweight technology, which we're going to hear. I think Sahas from the next panel can talk a little bit about kind of this idea of harnessing data in existing vehicles. So we'll get to that. But I think that what you're doing, you're saying we can harness the best in automation maybe today and optimize maybe existing fleets by just pushing a couple vehicles out there. Can you maybe talk about that? Because I think it may inform the way we talk about infrastructure too.
I think in any case, right, and I would love to hear how the city, and Treasure Island, by the way, if you go to Marina, I'll be a customer. I have my silver. But, what is the business model? So we have this 5G connectivity, AI in the cloud. We can do safe intersections. We can make our cars look around the corner. No LiDAR, no sensor can look around the corner, right? We can do that, and we can make it safer. Who's willing to pay for it? This is the hard thing. And the same thing with traffic congestion. And so in the end, I come to the cities and I come to, the public infrastructure, and maybe the infrastructure bill will help. Right? Billions of dollars will be invested and we'll create infrastructure. I'm a little afraid that we will have the wrong infrastructure because we're just spending it quickly. But I mean, this to me is really the hard problem. And this is why the management school, should really try to solve this. So, how can we make the cost in terms of safety and congestion, how can we spread this out that it is affordable? Because I'm not so sure if you have your own car driving on 680 are willing to pay $10 a month for other people to have the benefit for you for not standing in traffic. I don't know, right? This is really a tough issue. The technology is not the issue. Anyway, so we're trying to figure out the business model. What is Contra Costa County willing to pay? What is the federal government willing to pay? Are they going to install the infrastructure or not? Right? This is and then how can we make all the OEMs operate in this model? It just won't work for Nissan.
So, I mean, specifically, what type of infrastructure are you looking at for that?
Well, so it's 5G connectivity with one of the cell phone companies. It is, Amazon Cloud Services to run the AI and store the data. It is maybe cameras on the, better cameras than they have today in maybe half a mile, along the highway that is sending this data continuously to the cloud. That's the kind of.
And this could benefit the entire fleet, irrespective of whether or not if they were automated or not.
Well, in terms of congestion, yeah, because if you're not one of those 10% of the vehicles, you still have the benefit. So how do you spread this cost around?
Well, yeah, and I think it's difficult. It's a different answer in the European Union and other countries, or other areas around the world where those costs are borne differently.
Yeah, we have a long-term research collaboration with the Netherlands, the province of North Holland, specifically city of Amsterdam, Schiphol Airport, and the province there. And yeah, in the Netherlands, they have the best, traffic management system with everything is connected. All their traffic lights in the entire country is connected. And they pay that from federal taxes, right? Yeah. So if you're willing to pay taxes, we can do it. But, go vote.
Elisa, do you have any?
I just have one piece to add on the infrastructure. We're seeing a lot more of the AVs becoming EVs, and the EV component makes a whole other infrastructure barrier to make sure that there's charging available and accessible, where to put it, how to pay for it, right? It's like a whole nother layer of the infrastructure question that needs solving.
Yeah, and to respond to that or add on to that, it's something that is not going to be a national solution. Neuro with operations in the Bay Area, Arizona, Houston, Texas, now Las Vegas, Nevada, and Los Angeles as well. Each of those different areas have different existing electric vehicle charging capacity needs, what's happening on the ground there. And so, we might need to vary our strategy based on where we're deploying, what resources might be available at the city level. And it's something that, we love to engage with those types of conversations to figure out, how can we work together to build the right EV infrastructure that can be shared and benefited from everyone in the community, in addition to helping with our autonomous vehicles, because back to what Martin was saying as well, that helps reduce the cost, right? The high utilization of vehicles, the high utilization of the EV charging, all of those different things help to lower the costs. And you really want to make sure you're building the right technology and leveraging the right resources to make that work for everyone in the community.
Vote. No, no, and I think that we do have some draft EV. We can't put you on the spot, Elisa, but I know that Tilly, your colleague, the executive director of the CTA, actually is working on some stuff that would help accelerate some of this EV infrastructure, which is a really important point. And I think some of the questions are asking about, kind of the benefits of fleets, and particularly AV fleets, is that in most cases we're seeing that they are EV. So even if we're seeing a substitution for rideshare, we're seeing that we do have the benefit of a greener fleet in this situation. But so I want to maybe hear from.
Can I say one thing on this? I mean,
no, it's not allowed.
It's like so EVs great, love EVs, more EVs. 10% EVs and our grid will stop. You won't have electricity anymore tonight. Right, so there is a huge issue there that we
capacity.
Yeah, capacity on the grid is, and by the way, it's not just California. I mean, California has but they have the same problem in the Netherlands, right? And there the EV population is growing drastically and dramatically, and they're already seeing this, and they just, how to solve that problem. So
and
now,
you remember we had the Finnish delegation here this summer, and they were asking, not only is it a capacity issue in California, it's an inability to share back. Basically the grid isn't that smart.
Yeah, so having bidirectional charging and and all this technology still needs to be implemented before you can actually reach this massive, pay, and it's going to be cheap. It's going to be slow going.
So it's yes and, I think is what we're saying. It's
Sorry?
Electrification and automation.
Yeah, it's both.
So we got a lot of questions from the audience about this idea, and you started to get into it, Dan, about kind of different operational domains, but different kind of urban landscapes. And so I'm going to combine two questions a little bit here about kind of what are the use cases. We've seen kind of urban deployments a lot of times, and just kind of these complex urban situations. But what would allow for more suburban or rural applications? What happens when for example, it's really too costly for a company to go in and do the 3D mapping that's required to run some of these vehicles in a more rural location? Does that mean that the public sector needs to step up with some of this 3D mapping? And then how do we actually move towards carless yet automated cities? Is that a vision? Is there a way to kind of make that happen? How do we get there? So maybe we could. These are two questions from our audience here. Alante's jumping in.
Oh, I was like, didn't you say Dan? Didn't you tee up Dan for that?
Dan already started us on this topic.
Okay. I think regarding can we, I guess, achieve a carless future? I'm not sure, and I'm not sure that's within my scope of something I've really thought about deeply, to be quite honest. But can you maybe ask?
I believe the question framed it as no privately owned vehicles.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah, that's
excuse me, not I went to a platform. That was not the point of the question.
But a future where we have no privately owned vehicles. I mean, I think that could be within reality for an urban area where the density is at a certain level, but I definitely struggle with maybe wanting to say the same thing for rural settings. That being just literally the way that these areas are structured and mapped out. But I think autonomy does potentially provide an opportunity there where maybe there's service to specific services, to specific areas. Something maybe similar to the pilot where it's going to like very pointed areas and there's service available that way. That might be when point to point is really appropriate. So going from door to door service, taking someone from where they want to go to the grocery store and back, that might be an appropriate time where AVs can still provide the service. But I do think to say that we would live in a future where everyone is not required to own a car, I'm not sure that can be our reality more in the near future, just because there's a lot more technology development, and also that rural setting just has a totally different set of needs than the urban setting.
Yeah, and let me maybe continue on what I was talking about a little bit earlier. I'm not going to make a mistake of being on stage and predicting some future out there like some other colleagues in the autonomous vehicle industry have done over the last 5 or 10 years. But, it's looking at what can be done in the short term and what can be done in the long term. And you don't need to give up your big truck right away if that's what you use to go camping, or the snow vehicle to get up to Tahoe. You don't need to give that up right now. But could you replace that shopping trip that you would normally do in that vehicle with an electric vehicle, with an autonomous vehicle today? And for some people, that answer is yes. And hopefully that will grow and expand. When you look at suburban, rural, urban areas, Neuro has focused right now, at least in the more suburban areas, where we feel it's a little easier to operate and we can deliver a really good delivery service to the people that live in, this zip code, and then expand it to more zip codes beyond that. And as we grow and expand, hopefully more people will be able to get those services. It doesn't mean we're doing the wrong thing, the fact that we can't service everyone today. If you think back to where maybe the aviation industry was 100 plus years ago, when they were Orville's were developing the first plane, it couldn't make it over a river, let alone the Atlantic Ocean. It doesn't mean they were working on the wrong technology. It doesn't mean they were, this technology wouldn't at some point become valuable. And it really took, in fact, again, with the aviation industry, airmail, right? The federal government coming in and doing delivery services with aviation industry in short hops. It couldn't make it across the country, but it could make it to different postal destinations. And that started where we are today with the aviation industry. But the aviation industry isn't even done yet, right? With all the companies working on the electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, the supersonic, like all of the different stuff. And so the industry will continue to evolve. And I think we're still at the very, very early stages of this autonomous technology. And some people are able to experience the magic of that right now in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, and some of the areas in Houston, in Arizona. And so, it's something that's really, really exciting, but it's not there yet. And we do need a lot more people to come in and help us solve these problems, to have these discussions, to figure out where the right appropriate deployment of this technology is at the early stages, and then, where do we go from here?
I do think it's a choice. Society has a choice. The city of Amsterdam has made the choice. There will be no more cars in the city. There's going to be a boundary, and from that boundary on, you can only have a taxi going in or public transportation. I forget the numbers, but the huge, like 100 and 200,000 housing being built in the city of Amsterdam, no garages, no parking spaces, and this will drive, cities without cars. And then, that doesn't mean there's no transportation. So what they're doing is they're building so-called micro hubs, micro mobility hubs, in about...
Say it in Dutch. What's it? Because I love this word, mobility hub.
I don't even know.
Yeah, okay. I can't pronounce it either.
I think the Dutch
way too guttural.
Micro mobility hub.
Mobiliteit.
Mobiliteit. Yeah, but anyway, but they're going to do about 100 kilometers out of the cities. There's rural areas. There's, they have great public transportation there, but it's still hard for people to come, and so they take the car to come into the city. So they have these small hubs. Autonomous shuttle services will bring the people from home to those hubs. From there, you can take a train into the city on the edge. Then you can take a subway or you can take a tram. So it's possible. You just have to decide that's what you want as a society. And I think if you want that, you can make it work. I mean, that's just my opinion, but we'll see if Americans want that kind of society.
Well, I mean, Alante, are we gonna chime in there? I saw you
It's just like, well, it's perfect because Amsterdam's urban. It's a dense, highly dense city, and it's urban, right? So I think that
It's also
point is
very
true.
old, right? So the streets were not
Okay.
built for cars.
Okay, I haven't been yet, so I'm.
Well, yeah, sorry, I mean, but Amsterdam also has suburbs, and so that's where I was thinking about some of our mutual friends,
Yeah.
Martin, who live, for example, out in Oudwater or Snitterwald, and way outside the city, and
Yeah, in
and
farmland,
so
right?
there are these different urban frameworks where you have to partner on different solutions, and that's what we were talking about. Lisa, I would like to maybe, as we kind of bring us to a close, you had a question to me before we started, which was like, what does partnership look like? You're at a public agency, and you're saying like, well, I'm partnering with a couple private sector vendors over the next couple years. I don't know. You didn't say how long your project was, and some people in the audience were interested, but what does successful innovation partnership look like, and what do we need to do? And if anybody else wants to chime on that, like how do we do true multi-sector public-private partnership?
Yeah, so the pilot it's planned to be in 2023, so we'd be completing it early 2024, just in terms of timing. Partnerships are complicated. There's a lot of moving pieces. Through the shuttle pilot that we've been working on at the TA, we had a long process of reaching out to different vendors and hearing, what they need to operate, what technology is needed, what does timing look like, getting all of these questions so that we could inform and create a procurement process that meets the community needs and also meets the needs of the industry so that we can come together and partner. And that was a long process to understand, and it helped us form a good operating agreement, a good pilot concept. And then we also have in San Francisco some guiding principles for new mobility that I think are important to look at. They were adopted in 2018. But there's like these 10 principles, things like labor, equity, accessibility, supporting transit, all of these pieces that come into play that matter a lot to the city and help us make sure that new options like AVs support our long-term goals. So it's looking at both sides of the puzzle.
Yep, and maybe I'll just chime in here. Lastly, we do partner with a lot of cities in a couple of different ways. The one being business partnerships, which cities actually need to move out around a lot of stuff, or they fund nonprofit agencies that need to do things like food delivery. I know Cruise is working on some food delivery pilots, Neuro is as well, with nonprofit organizations and food banks. But there's also partnerships around education. How do we educate the people who, again, are all sharing the road about these new autonomous vehicles that we have on the road that folks are seeing? How do we work on partnerships to inspire the next generation of workforce as well? So how do we partner with schools to teach kids in STEM classes about this type of technology that they may want to get involved in? And then, on workforce development side as well, Neuro has a partnership with one of the community colleges on the peninsula, De Anza College, where they have a great automotive technician program where they, you go through and you get a certificate to become an auto mechanic. We worked with them to develop an autonomous electric vehicle technician pathway program and certificate. So that way, students that are going through this program are excited about automotive tech careers can actually layer on maybe a computer science course or two and specialize in working on these autonomous electric vehicles to help maintain the vehicles that are going to be out on the roadway. And so, there's a variety of different types of partnerships beyond also the business partnerships where, we can all come together to work together on this.
Yeah, I would, say that I think every industry, the OEMs, right, they're very much willing to work together with policymakers and with cities and government agency. For instance, in Japan, Nissan has, there is this new city being developed called Namie City, which is where the Fukushima earthquake was. And they're trying to redevelop it, and Nissan is providing the entire mobility service there. And it's not just autonomous, right? These are also shared mobility services. And because the OEMs, we know that we have to work together in order to go to the new next form of transportation. And so there's a lot of willingness, I think, on that side to work together in terms of what are your requirements, what are you willing to implement, because it is if we don't do it together, it will not happen.
Lante, last word?
Yeah, I think just to kind of bring this all together is we're working with varying levels of imperfection.
Yeah.
Right? Like on both sides of this equation. But I do think there's a desire to figure it out. And I think that's what's really promising about the technology.
Yeah, I appreciate it. That's a good way to end, and it's kind of like a spirit of collaboration and not being too skeptical when you enter into these conversations. So let's give this group a hand. This was a really rich conversation. We're going to get a photo really fast, but I'm going to ask a couple of my speakers, Sahas and Barak and Timo, if you get ready to come up for our next panel, which is going to focus on a little more on the data side of things, but let's get in here for a little group photo. Awesome. Thank you all. We did, I don't have them here with me, but if you are leaving, make sure you talk to my staff because they got a little thank you gift for you. So make sure you find that. It's very nice. All right, so we're going to keep on rolling. So I'm going to ask and really kind of dive in more. We talked a little bit about kind of the partnership piece there, and I think you're going to see now, we're going to open the aperture a little bit and focus on kind of vehicles that are out there now. So maybe Sahas, if you guys, Barak, you guys want to come up? I'm going to sit right over there. I'm going to walk in front of you. Are we switching out some water glasses for us? Okay. All right, and so if you're watching online, keep in mind that you can submit questions in the online forum. I got that chair right there. I was told that's where I need to sit. So keep in mind you can submit questions. I got a couple of questions here that I'm going to ask that you all respond. You ask the panelists if you can find them during our break, which is coming up. You can find them out there, but we're going to roll into kind of our next panel. Two of you I hadn't met in person, so this is awesome. So this is great, and I've known this guy forever. So I met him in Munich like long time ago. But maybe let's sit down, find a mic, and we can just get started. Maybe, Timo, I can put you on the spot first. So we can talk like a little bit about data, smart cities. Where are we going with existing infrastructure? You want to intro yourself?
Thank you, yeah. Thanks for having me. Do we know each other for so long, really?
Yeah, so long.
Yeah, hi, I'm Timo Schalk. I'm with BMW. I'm the BMW Group representative here in the United States on the West Coast. And I really enjoyed the conversation that you just had on stage here, and I would love to really get into some of the details here as well. Just a couple of words about BMW. Most of you know certainly BMW. We have, and I'm really proud to say that we have a long-lasting sustainability strategy compared in the industry, and we work on that strategy. We develop it, and when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions and reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, we figured out that the major emissions come certainly from the supply chain, from the production, and the third one is the use phase of the vehicle. And what we are talking today is how can we actually reduce the emissions from the use phase of our vehicles. So first off, electrification is certainly one point. Martin just made the point that there is still a lot to do. Like the grid is not really capable of 100% EV as of today. But only replacing conventional vehicles by electric vehicles will certainly not solve the challenges of our mobility, for example. So data and AI and autonomous vehicles can really support this. And we just announced, like I think yesterday or the day before yesterday, that the new 7 Series, our flagship model, is the first car to actually use the HERE HD real-time map, enabling level 2 plus autonomous driving on the street, which is great. And BMW defined two different actually modes of driving recently. One is ease, and the other is boost. And ease meaning ease would also summarize autonomous driving, because this is when I'm maybe on my daily commute. This is not really when I want to make a joyride like in the weekends. That would be then the boost. And autonomous vehicles and all the data behind that will certainly make it possible for us to keep on providing a good product to our customers.
Thanks, Timo. Can you just maybe provide us a little more window into how you ended up in the U.S. working on
Sure, yeah.
smart
Sorry.
cities and like
I just realized
yeah.
I'm with BMW for well over 10 years now, so I'm a bit longer with the automotive industry than you are. When I started back in 2012 in Munich, that was all about electromobility, and there were a lot of government projects going on, especially on fast charging in Germany. So that was my first touch point, actually. And then back in 2014, we founded a center of competence for urban mobility, because we realized that electrification would also depend on cities and how much cities actually pave the way for electric vehicles. So I was responsible for our cooperation with Hamburg, which is the second biggest city in Germany. And what we did is actually we reached out to all the different agencies of the city and said, okay, please define what is your most pressing target? What problem do you really need to solve? And then we can figure out how to really solve this chicken and egg problem between the infrastructure, for example, and the demand for those kind of infrastructure that has to be in place. And we were really successful. We used our car share fleet, Drive Now, to create an instant demand for public charging infrastructure. We were talking about privileged parking for car share vehicles, for electric vehicles, and all that stuff to make it as easy as possible for people to at least try it out. And then maybe to see, okay, this is a good alternative. I don't need my private vehicle every single ride. Maybe it's only, I don't know, 1/3 of the time. So that's basically how I ended up being in this space here.
Awesome. I wore my Bavarian shirt, by the way.
Oh yeah, appreciate it.
I didn't have any smart car gear, Sahas. I had a mug, but it's still in my office. So do you want to introduce yourself really and talk about what Smart Car does a little bit?
Sure. My name is Sahas. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a startup called Smart Car. We've been around for about 5 or 6 years, and we really got started when maybe about 5-6 years ago, when we were actually trying to build an app, my co-founder and I, for a car. And we found that was actually really hard to do. You can't go to any car company's brand.com. They typically don't have API documentation or SDKs available. So when it comes to trying to innovate or build an application that integrates with the car you own, or an application you want to build for someone else to use, that was incredibly challenging. So we realized that the big opportunity, or the gap in the market, was the fact that there isn't a way to build apps for cars, and there wasn't a common developer platform that folks could go integrate with to build an app once and have it work everywhere. So we went out and started a company called Smart Car. We've now raised about $36 million in venture capital. We're a team of about 40 to 45 folks, all in California. And we now are integrated with about 33 different car brands, so about 9,500 developers using this platform, and about 153 million cars integrated across North America and Europe, making Smart Car actually now the world's largest connected car platform. So we're pretty excited about all the exciting things that folks are building on top of this technology.
And you're an interesting story too, because you're kind of born and raised Bay Area, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, Stanford, right? Is that
no, unfortunately not. I wish, my parents wish, but it's even worse. I went to UC Davis, but actually ended up dropping out before my 4th year. So my co-founder is actually my brother. He graduated from UC Berkeley. So usually at the family get-togethers and parties, they would act like I didn't exist since I didn't graduate, and he was the proud one that always had the college degree. So that's a little bit about
yeah,
us.
I'm glad we got there. I've heard this little narrative before. It's fun. So, Brock, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, we have a dead one.
Does this work? Oh, maybe this is- all right.
we have Pink.
Hello.
Yeah,
All right,
Pink.
good. All right, so yeah, I'm Brock. I'm a partner at Autotech Ventures. We are an early stage venture capital firm. We have close to $500 million asset under management, and we are on our third fund, which is $175 million. And our sweet spot is seed and Series A stage startups, and we only invest in ground transportation, mobility-related startups. And we invest globally, and within that, we do EVs, AVs, manufacturing, supply chain, logistics, repair, insurance, the whole value chain within mobility.
And how does one end up in a VC role like yours? Because I think we have a lot of folks in our master's program interested in like that pathway. And how do you end up in that
Very
space?
indirect,
Yeah.
very windy road. So I studied electrical engineering at Caltech, graduated back in 2004, and did actually engineering. So I work for a manufacturer of heavy haul locomotives called Electromotive Diesel in Chicago. And it's actually funny that, like, I remember that back in the day, the locomotives were also sending data about their, status and the fuel level, this, that. And we used to do that with text messages. So back in the day, like, your data connectivity was text messages from the locomotive. Anyway, so I did that for several years, then management consultant, marketing and sales strategy. And then I got my MBA from University of Chicago. And there, after that, I started an accelerator program in Chicago with my partner, bringing foreign startups to the US market. So think of it as like Techstars or Y Combinator, but for foreign startups, foreign entrepreneurs that have a product or a service for the US market. So did that for many, many years. Had my own startups, failed, but learned a lot of good lessons. And then I joined... Because of that accelerator, I was going back and forth between Europe and the US quite a bit. So I joined a VC firm in Europe, Eastern Europe, making investments in Eastern Europe, and worked there for several years. And then I said it's time to move back to the United States and join Autotech back in 2019.
Wow, great journey. Yeah, it's great.
Thanks.
Yeah. So maybe we can just dive in now that we've kind of introduced ourselves and you provided some humor sauce to start us off. So maybe I'll pick on you first. So when we think about kind of future of data-driven vehicles, kind of what are really the opportunities? And you're there and working with kind of existing fleets, and I think we heard a little bit of that if you were listening to kind of Martin talk about existing fleets and data. What are the opportunities from your vantage point for looking at data as we look at today's fleet and then maybe the future automated, autonomous fleet? What do you see as kind of some low-hanging fruit and then maybe more aspirational goals?
So as a starting point, I think there's a little bit of a misnomer about where the value is in the automotive industry. There's a lot of folks keep talking about data, and we've heard the phrase like data's the new oil, and first off, that doesn't make sense to me when we're going electric, so that's a really strange phrase that the automotive industry really likes to use. But the second piece I'd say is we think kind of like we're in San Francisco, so great analogies, maybe the gold rush. There was a lot of folks who came out here thinking gold is a big opportunity, but the value layer ended up being in the shovels and picks, Levois, everything else that came along, rather than the gold itself. So when it comes to automotive, there's been a lot of enthusiasm misplaced around the data itself, in my opinion. But rather where the value is in the developer tooling and layers that enable software creators and developers to actually go integrate with cars and build applications that actually create new experiences and value for people who drive those vehicles. So, and the data itself, in our opinion, does not belong to the OEMs. It does not belong to your insurer. It does not belong to the government. It belongs to the vehicle owner. And that's been another piece that strange in every industry. It's pretty clear who owns the data, but the automotive industry, in my opinion, is the one place where, for some reason, there's still some lack of clarity around it.
I want to go there, but can we wait to go there? Because I want to go there too. Because there's more I want to unravel there on who owns the data. But maybe, Mr. Timo, do you have any thoughts about kind of what are the opportunities for data, or maybe, can we tearing off what Sahas said, maybe there's opportunities for app development or application to the vehicular sector, and maybe it's not in kind of private occupancy vehicles, maybe it's in fleets, maybe it's in platooning vehicles. I'd be interested in seeing, kind of hearing your vision there.
Yeah, totally. I agree with what you said. Data is not, they don't have an actual value, right? It's not gold. It's only something that you can use to make a service or an application or something work better in the future. And this is where I think is the value for us as an OEM. So our customers, we are a premium manufacturer, right? And our customers expect a high level of performance and of quality in the vehicle. And this applies not only to the vehicle, like how fast it can go or so, but it also applies to the connected services. And so this is something that really we can make use of, and we do it today. We add layers to our cars, like I don't know, black eyes warning, just to mention one, or emergency call is mandatory in Europe, and we had it like 10 years ago in every single vehicle. This is how data and the access to data and the sensors and all that can make it actually better. Personally, I believe that the big transformational thing, the big disruptor will be pooling services in cities, but also in rural areas, and that data, predictive data and AI, that this will make it possible for the service providers to actually run and operate the service. This is, I guess, the big game changer.
And does BMW develop a lot of their software in-house, or would they contract with others, or maybe provide stuff that would actually work?
Yeah, good question. Well, we do both. We have like 15,000 engineers in Munich where we run our R&D center, but we certainly also need. We had a cooperation with Mobileye a couple of years ago,
right,
to really understand, because BMW is comparably, like, to you guys, we are super big, but compared to Nissan, we are maybe not that big, or Toyota or so, right? And so we need to find the best possible way for us as a medium-sized OEM, how to actually deal with the costs that are certainly really not irrelevant, right? And we have to invest into electrification, at the same time into automation, at the same time into data security, and then we still have these minor trade issues and supply chain issues right now. So that's quite a lot at the same time, right? And we need to figure out who are the best partners for us. Might be a company like yours, but might be also another manufacturer like Mercedes.
Well, and it's also, we have to recognize that a lot of these traditional larger OEMs that started as more or less family companies necessarily take a long time in their decision cycle. From a managerial standpoint, they are a little more less nimble many times, and that's not that can be an asset, but it also can be an impediment. And I said that you don't have to, but I think we saw when we had our students over in 2018 and working with you all on strategy, they were throwing out some ideas that were pretty radical. And I think it was maybe hard to foresee some of those futures they were anticipating then in 2018, when we weren't, things weren't pivoting so hard to ESG outcomes.
Well, we are in a good situation that 46% of our shares belong to one family. So, and they really give us kind of freedom to not only look into the next quarter and the figures of the next quarter, but to really make these long-term decisions, which is great. But still, 53% or 54% is of the shares are, I don't know, globally distributed somewhere, and those people, of course, also expect their return. So the business case discussion that you had in the previous discussion, I can hear that.
Maybe, Brock, do you have any thoughts in terms of kind of where the opportunities are here in terms of, and you would think about it from an investment standpoint,
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, when you think about data, I think there are like multiple layers of that. One is the obvious one, like the data from the car. Both of you guys are a good example of that. And I agree 100%. The data in itself is and will be commoditized. It's more about what you do with that data. But when you think about the data around vehicles, it's not just the data from a vehicle or about that driver. For example, like as I do a lot of like logistics investments, so last mile delivery, for example, like we are going in a world where like there are so many different last mile delivery companies, and then autonomous vehicles are adding to that, Neuros of the world, Starships of the world. Orchestration of that is a big problem, and that's a data issue as well. And then same thing, like, we have one company called Blue Dot that is enabling or providing location data. And in today's world, again, like when you're arriving a restaurant, when you are going to a takeout restaurant, there's so much you can do with that data from making logistics supply chain more efficient. So that is the second use case. And then the third one is more about at the infrastructure level. So for example, we have another company in our portfolio called Hayden AI. They have these smart cameras on city buses. And as the city buses go around the city, they are able to detect bus lane violations, bus stop violations. And again, that's another use case for data and helping cities use that data to manage the infrastructure more effectively. So it's not, when you think about data, the opportunities are not just about the vehicle or the passengers or the drivers. I think there are two other different levels on top of that.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of companies even entering to the data labeling space or the data processing space to actually accelerate automated solutions. And I think I'm not sure, Sahas, if you have like companies that are actually using your platform that are doing some of that work. Is that something that you have companies that'll be working on perhaps more advanced driving solutions that are using your platform?
So I think there's probably about 20 or 30 different kind of categories of applications being built on our platform today. If I had to highlight a couple of them, for instance, in the auto insurance space, a lot of insurance companies, or almost all of them, depend on antiquated mechanisms like the credit score, or while they can't use discriminatory factors like your age or gender, they do things like use your zip code, but that still has demographic representation if you pick a zip code. That's just the reality. So things like the credit score are discriminatory, and insurance rates are much higher for certain demographics than others. But once now consumers have access to their own vehicle's data and they're able to get priced if they choose to do so based on how many miles they drive, that is a lot more equitable, because it's no longer based on irrelevant factors like the zip code you happen to live in, but rather based on how much you drive, or if you choose to report it, how you drive your vehicle. When it comes to something like getting your car repaired or maintained, it turns out certain demographics get taken advantage of heavily by dealerships because there's no other option or choice. But if you have access to your own vehicle data and you can share it with multiple repair mechanic shops, independent or authorized dealers, you have visibility and transparency into how your car is performing, and you can likely receive a better quote. And that's happening today on our platform as well. Consumers are able to get vehicle history reports for the very first time that's actually based on how their car is performing because of platforms like SmartCar. We also talked, both previous panelists and you both mentioned the grid and how the grid might not be ready for EVs. There's probably a few 100,000 drivers today that are doing things like smart charging their car through our platform today. As it turns out, yes, there is not always availability of energy in the grid, but there is a high, there's a what do you call it? A lack of, there's a surplus available during off-peak hours, and during peak hours, there isn't enough availability. So about 30, 40 different venture-funded companies have emerged across Europe and North America that take advantage of our platform to shift charging away from the 4 to 9 p.m. windows when energy is really in high demand, and resume charging between midnight and, let's say, 6 a.m. when energy is actually not only more affordable, but it's also the energy makeup is often much cleaner as well. So these types of things are enabling consumers for the first time to actually have visibility and control of their own vehicle, and also give them benefits or advantages. And finally, I'll maybe touch on one more topic, since I know you're from the government side as well, but states like Utah, Virginia, Oregon, and California are now shifting away from the fuel gasoline tax. Rather than taxing drivers based on gas, they're taxing drivers based on the number of miles they drive. And rather than charging a very high EV registration fee each year, which disincentivizes people from purchasing an electric car, they're rather providing a variable rate based on the number of miles you drive. All of those states that I mentioned are using Smart Car's platform today to let drivers report their mileage. And they can get an invoice based on how much they drove rather than a much greater flat fee, registration fee each year. And these are the types of things that are giving consumers more control, power, transparency, and privacy over their own vehicle data.
Yeah, that's great. And then I think, I mean, when you talked about that last year, so I'm glad you brought that up, and we were able to have a more rich kind of in-person discussion. And one of the things that I want to kind of talk to you about is kind of this idea, and maybe we could, you focus a lot on kind of smart cities infrastructure with a lot of what you do as well. And it'd be interesting, come back to you, Sahas, and just hear kind of if there's interplay with some of the apps that are coming up in your platform between the type of infrastructure and IoT infrastructure that we're seeing deployed in cities by public or private vendors. And it sounds like Hayden is one of those. But I mean, so what is the kind of the smart city strategy from the BMW perspective? Is there infrastructure that you're putting in place or you're wanting to see in place? And it can be a European perspective if you want, but I'm just curious what your vision there is.
Yeah, okay. That's several questions. I will start. First off, you said, please don't get me wrong, I did not say that the grid is not ready or will not be ready. I'm just saying there is a lot we need to do. And BMW and PG&E started a project here in California called Charge Forward that exactly does what you just described, aligning people's charging demand to the supply of renewable energy to make some peak shaving. That's first. And second, what you said, Billy, what we tried in Hamburg and what I mentioned earlier, and in Berlin and other cities like Rotterdam, also in the Netherlands, is something that I want to try here in Los Angeles as well. So we use data that we have from our vehicles that are on the road, but we also conduct surveys to determine how people actually interact with their vehicle. And the reason why we do that is that we understand that there's different reasons why people use their private vehicle. And there's reason why people use or don't use the bike or the public transit or, I don't know, whatever, right? This ranges from accessibility to costs to safety to, I don't know, whatever you can imagine can be a reason why people do or don't do this. And we have really, we have a methodology developed together with a German university, and together with UC Davis, we will be conducting this in fall this year. We'll go to Los Angeles County, and to really find out how car dependent are people right now. Probably very car dependent, because in Los Angeles you don't have much alternatives in many places of the county. But the question is the car dependency something that people actually appreciate? Like, being in my car every day is really great? Or is it rather for many people that they say, well, there's just no other way to get around. I don't like sitting in the traffic jam every day for 2 hours. That's not what I want. And then we can use these findings, the data from our vehicles, including charging and all that, to develop, together with the city, new approaches, like what we did in Hamburg, what we did in Berlin, and where we were able to implement service that actually people really appreciated, and where we're not, we or the city or somebody else said, this is what you, in this neighborhood, what you need, because people know way better what they need and what they want than we do, and this is actually our approach.
So when you develop, it sounds like, when you develop that predictive model of travel behavior, so you can, and I'm assuming you can anticipate propensity to travel to a certain degree, or propensity for roadway collisions, or any number of things, which that is happening in Europe to a certain degree. But do you retain ownership of that predictive model, or is that co-owned between you and the public agency?
Well, right now we pay for that, so it's our the property is
your
ours.
IP, yeah.
Yeah, but it's the value is much bigger if we share it. It's useless if we use it only for our own purpose. But of course we want to share it. So if anybody has some proposals, I'd be happy to hear and discuss it for LA next year. We are looking for partners to exactly use this data that we are just about to generate.
Yeah, I mean, I think we did have a question from the audience that just kind of like if I'm a developer and I want to develop on one of your platforms, or maybe a Hayden platform, or kind of our smart car, or use this data, can I develop my own AI predictive models based on your data? And it sounds like maybe slices of data could be available to researchers or things like that. Am I saying that right? Am I overstating or?
Well, there's two data that I'm talking about. One is the vehicle data, and we have to be really strict about that data. And it's not only that we don't want to share it, but there's some privacy concerns coming with this as well. So our customers really expect us, not only us, but anybody who actually deals with data, to really be careful with what we do. And there's the vehicle safety aspect as well. So just giving any third-party access to the vehicle to provide some services means also that the vehicle remains unprotected, and anybody who has the skills can actually take over the vehicle, which is certainly not what anybody wants. So this is a data that we really are cautious what we do with that, but we also share this data with cities to make, I don't know who mentioned this, pothole detection, for example, is something that our vehicles can do. So the camera can do it, but also the bumpers can detect that there's a pothole. And we can detect those data to the city and say, well, on this main street, on this location, there is a pothole. You need to fix that. That is certainly something we do.
Brock, you were going to weigh in there?
I was going to give another example. So we have another company in our portfolio called Gridwise, and it's a cross gig economy platform analytics software. So as a gig economy driver, you are using Uber one day, Lyft or DoorDash. You are using multiple platforms. And oftentimes, you don't know how to manage it most effectively. So they're providing that analytics to the drivers. But as a byproduct of that, they have amazing data across all the drivers and across all the platforms. So any given place, they can clearly see what the market share of a specific platform is, or where are the hotspots in the cities are, and they actually monetize that data. And they also share it with universities. So for a research project, they share it with gig economy platforms, but they also share it with charging networks. For example, where to put your charging stations based on this gig economy activity. So there, that's a kind of like a win-win-win scenario where the drivers, the gig economy workers, benefit from that analytics product. It's a commercial agreement between the platform and them, and then they aggregate that data and they make that available to third parties that they can use that for their own decision making.
So if I'm a city and I want to kind of provide data that facilitates innovation for one of your companies, Barack, or maybe for a developer that's working on your platform, Sahas, what kind of data is most useful for me to provide into those kind of ecosystems?
Well, we ourselves don't store any data. We have no data at Smart Cars, so we don't provide anyone with data because we have none to provide. But what we do enable is let consumers, if they choose to do so, access their own vehicle data and bring it into the products and services that they choose to use. So that's a fundamental difference. So if, again, you want to share your odometer reading with your insurance company or your charging status with your utility or anything of that nature, we facilitate letting a consumer make that choice and decision. But we ourselves don't have any data sets, whether it's identifiable. We don't have any data sets, whether it's anonymized or aggregate. We don't have any form of data sets in any form to share with any entity. So it would require explicit consent from every single individual vehicle owner to allow them to access their own information and do what they want with it.
Well, let's go there. What about this interplay between consumers and their rights to their own data? I mean, because how should companies and developers really be thinking about that?
Sure. So, let's see, in the audience here, how many of you have owned a point-and-shoot camera? Raise your hand, or DSLR, smartphone, whatever it is. Okay. And how many of you, raise your hand again, if you believe that photo you took on your camera should belong to you, that you own the rights to it? Pretty much everyone. And then let's go over to some sort of software service. How many of you use Microsoft Office or Google Docs? Perfect. If you wrote an essay, a book, you published something, raise your hand again if you believe you own the exclusive rights to what you wrote in that product or service. That's pretty much everyone again. So whether you sell that photograph you took on your phone or camera, whether you publish a book that you wrote in Microsoft Word or Google Docs, there's no expectation that you pay Google or Nikon or Canon a fraction or all of what you make when you do commercialize that item. But yet when it comes to your car, there's still often a chief data monetization officer in a lot of OEM organizations who believe that where you drove, when you drove, how you drove, when your car needs diagnostics, when it needs maintenance, is their information. And they're trying to sell or aggregate or anonymize that, whether it's for cities, dealerships, repair mechanic shops, whatever it might be. So that's what we're talking about here at Smart
I think we should also say cities want that data too.
And yes, cities should be able to get something, but again, if there is a consumer who chooses to participate in it, they should have that right to that privacy as well. And that's also part of why we're pretty excited about things like the American Data Privacy and Protection Act that is making it, reinforcing that consumers have privacy when it comes to their own vehicle data, as long as, in addition to any other type of consumer electronic device that they may own or operate.
Agree, disagree, thoughts?
Well, my view is slightly different. Of course, you are right that once you have the vehicle, you own also the data. The question is what you do with that data. And if you, as a customer, give consent to the insurance company that they can determine your driving style and make your, I don't know, your insurance rate higher or lower, that's certainly up to you. And we allow this. The only thing is that the insurance company will not get direct access to the vehicle, but will have to go through the cloud, which is not a big problem, I guess. But then there's a lot of data which, I mean, if the sensors determine that your car needs a service, right, then this data is something that you can use and go to the next third party and say, well, please do me this service, or I want to book the service. And if you give consent, then that's also not a problem. But who else would use this data then?
Well, so maybe we say that, for example, in most of Europe, their traction control data is required to be shared with roadway agencies for safety reasons. Should people be, for the public good, should people be able to opt out of that? Or should they be automatically, or should they opt in? And so maybe there's some policy mechanisms in terms of opting in, opting out, or some aggregation type strategies. So I think maybe that's a more fair comparison in terms of like something that you already are participating in.
Well, personally, I'm not that hesitant to share certain data if the company I'm sharing it with is trustworthy, and I think that is one of the secrets that we as an industry that we have to keep our word, and that we have to. There have been so many bad examples in the future of what happened to the data that people actually gathered and used and sold and even influenced public elections and all that. So this is really bad for all that usage. If I would be a customer, I would not opt out that my vehicle traction data is sent to a public agency. But if people want to do that for whatever reason, they should be able to.
Brock, any thoughts?
I think, yeah, of course, like consumers' data is their own data, but there are different, shades of gray. Like, in your example too, with Microsoft or your phone, there are also like, crash reports, but still like, you give permission if you want to share that crash report with the developer. But, that's, for example, similar example of like with the car data. There are so much you can do with that data that is beneficial for everybody. And then for the other data from a regulation point of view, I think, there are certain things that, yeah, it's easier to get it from the car, but it's also externally observable data. You can externally observe certain, like speeding, for example. Like you can, if you had radars everywhere, you could potentially observe that without tapping into the car. So tapping into the car is just a shortcut to get that data. So that's another shade of gray there. Like, oh yeah, I could have gotten that data. It just makes it easier. Can I get that data through the car?
So what about kind of the notion of road use charges for EVs? And can you comment a little more on kind of how that might play out for fleets, and kind of how you see, maybe the smart car platform actually working on a fleet level in terms of pricing? Because we talked a little bit about, as we're looking towards automation, I think we're seeing more automated fleets. Is there a platform-based approach to that?
Yeah, so I think we're seeing pretty much every DOT at the state level, as well as the federal DOT, figuring out what their decisions are around taxation of electric vehicles, hybrids, or even just the evolution of the tax for gas cars as well. So I think that's been super interesting to see because, one, a lot of them are actually quite progressive in not wanting to actually have access to private information. They don't want to be storing or handling people's PII, which has actually been very surprising for us to see. When we walked into this, we were worried that they would want to be like tracking every single driver's geolocation by the second or something of that nature. And the reality is I wouldn't want that personally, nor does anyone I've ever spoken with. So, but the second thing is I think a lot of them are finding creative ways to operate these programs. As an example, let's take the state of Utah or Virginia. At first glance, someone may think, hey, if I need to be opting into these programs, what is the government or some state collecting about me? As it turns out, the only thing that they end up collecting at the end of the year is an integer, a single integer, the differential between the first day of the year and the last day of the year, which is the difference in your odometer reading from the start of the year to the end of the year. So when constituents in the states or people who live there were surveyed about this, are you comfortable with something like that being shared? And they say, yeah, I'm fine with that. That's pretty minimal. It's clear to me exactly what's being shared. It's not what day I drove, what hour I drove, where I drove, when I drove, or who was in my car, or anything of that nature. But it's a really simple mileage that was transmitted and stored, and that's it for my invoicing. And once that invoice is complete, they even toss that piece of information. So if it's done correctly, it's incredibly exciting. And when it comes to fleets, I think a lot of the states are looking at a rate that varies based on things like weight class. If you have a lightweight passenger car, you may get charged this many cents per mile. If you drive a much heavier vehicle, which causes more wear and tear on the roads that you drive on, then you pay a slightly higher rate per every mile you drive. And it still comes out with the exact same solution where they end up storing not much more than that differential of the first day of the month or first day of the year to the last day of the year. So it can maintain privacy, it can use very minimal data, and it can be a pretty simple mechanism to explain to folks of how it works. And again, the more funding that we put into our infrastructure means tires that last longer, less microplastics that end up in our water supply, better MPG for your vehicle. Less potholes means, less broken axles, less maintenance on your vehicle, less broken windshields from things hitting it. And most drivers, from the research that I've seen, end up actually saving money if the right funding goes into the infrastructure that we drive on.
So, okay, I want to ask you one more thing about this. So, if I'm a rider in a fleet vehicle, I'm a rider, so I'm a consumer, for example, to Uber and Lyft. Do I have a right to turn off my data sharing with a third party?
So, sorry.
Should I have a right?
Say that one more time.
If I'm a customer in a fleet vehicle, for example, a rideshare vehicle, should I have a right to turn off access to my ride data?
So that would probably be governed by the terms of service between you and the service that you're using, yeah. But the topic that I think is pretty interesting to me, and I'd love to also hear your perspective on this, is right now there's actually a BMW driver in the state of California who's filed a class action lawsuit. And part of why is by turning on your car, you agree to the terms of service that states that your data is being shared by simply turning on your infotainment system. So there's no way to opt out of that. By simply turning on and starting to drive your car, you're opting into that data collection. So things of this nature are really interesting to us because you should have an option to not have to have your data shared with third parties. And I'm kind of curious to see how OEMs evolve in their thinking around this because, again, on smartphones and all these other products, some of them have headed in the wrong directions with all sorts of consumer electronics. But now we're seeing a reel back, right? And phones like your iPhone, even Android, a lot of them are heading in the direction of a lot of privacy controls that are emerging. So consumers ensure that their location, their photographs, their contact lists, their text messages, things like this are actually protected. And you consumers have control over the permissions that they can permit, a third-party app to actually access information off their device. And we're hoping to see that model get more adopted within the automotive sector as well.
Timo, you want to respond and maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I heard this comparison between car and smartphone like many times. A car and a smartphone are two different things. That's why I think you should treat them differently, at least to a certain extent. I don't know the case you were referring to here in California. I will look it up later. But in general, again, the car manufacturer always is responsible for the safety of the vehicle, always, period. And this is where the discussion ends on in my world, because people, we have to make sure that the car is under every situation is really performing as it's supposed to be, as it's supposed to. And if we open up too much, then this is really under pressure.
So, Mark, I want to give you the last word here because I feel like we've talked a lot about the data, but you see a lot of stuff from an innovation standpoint. So your landscape as an investor is really wide. And when we think about infrastructure investment going into the future, whether or not it's EV charge stations, whether or not it's smart city infrastructure, certain types of signals and process hardware or software, where do you see the opportunity for kind of pushing envelope? Where is the innovation space that you're looking in terms of the future of your funds?
Yeah, so when you think about innovation and where the world is going and the opportunity from a venture capital point of view, they can be different things because, there are certain things where we are adding more charging stations. We need solutions to better optimize our fleets, better pick locations for those, this, that. The world isn't going in one direction, but that doesn't mean that there is necessarily a venture investment opportunity there. There can be a lot of companies making money in those domains as well. But again, if there isn't a clear, defensibility or order of magnitude, better results from the other ones, it's difficult to get venture-like returns on those investments. So I think those are two different things. In a lot of these cases, that includes infrastructure, that includes electrification, that includes fleet optimization, that includes charging stations, that includes charging infrastructure. A lot of these things are happening and the world is going one direction. But when you look at specific opportunities, the differentiation or the order of magnitude better result is oftentimes not there.
Yeah, that's a good perspective. And I think it reminds us, too, that these issues are super thorny, right? Everything we grapple with up here is not... It's not an easy issue. This data privacy thing, we've been talking about this for a long time. We'll be talking about this tomorrow, most likely, after the election. But the thing is that I think what you painted is this idea that when we talk about, for example, the investment that government is putting in now really can take off some of that top loss capital, that we can maybe see some of these companies that are doing some of this this work that isn't as profitable. It's not traditional. Maybe that can actually accelerate some of those ESG investments that we really want to see happen for some of these wicked or thorny problems. And so thank you all. We're out of time. This was another great conversation. Let's give them a hand. We're going to get another photo. You could join me. We'll take a photo. And we're also going to take a little break. We've got a coffee cart out here for you to enjoy a beverage, but come back because we've got a final conversation about Cruise looking into the future. So make sure you stick around. Really appreciate it. And so take about 30-minute break. Thanks, guys. That was really good. Thank you. Really good again. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah. Nice to see you. Sorry. We have, I think, 2,000 people online, so FYI, just be on point. All right, welcome back. I hope everybody enjoyed that little treat. For those of you that stayed, you're in for a treat because we have a great conversation slated where we're going to really focus on where we're going next and some successes. So I guess it's my pleasure to introduce Prashanti Raman from Cruise. Prashanti, maybe you could tell the audience here and everybody online who you are, what you do. I think we've heard a little bit about Cruise, but maybe you could just tell us your perspective on Cruise.
Great. Thanks. Good afternoon. I realize I have the privilege and honor and yet the burden of being the last session before you get to drink out there. So, we'll try to make it as fun as possible.
Oh, there's happy hour of this? Is it, wait, what? Oh, for all those people that left.
So, I'm Prashanti Raman. I am Vice President of Global Government Affairs at Cruise, the all-electric self-driving company founded in 2013. You'll see us here in San Francisco as well as in Phoenix. We are an all-electric from the start fleet that is dedicated to self-driving with the mission to improve people's lives, to connect things and people and places and experiences that they care about. We have been on the road since that 2013. We're going to talk a little bit about our different functional areas, our different philosophical areas, and obviously our operations here on the streets of San Francisco. So excited to be here. I've been at the company for about 2.5 years. I was at a company that you may recall the name of, Lyft. Prior to that, I was there for 5.5 years as their head of North America government relations. I'm a healthcare lawyer by way of background, so really tech and transportation was sort of a pivot in a new career. I have an MPH, and I was a regulatory healthcare lawyer for several years until I got a gubernatorial appointee by the then governor of Illinois, Pat Quinn, to run his healthcare legislative affairs. And I was serendipitously handed the ride-sharing bill back in 2014, which is sort of the connective tissue between healthcare and emerging tech and transportation right now. So very grateful to Billy for being an incredible partner, to USF, as well as Commonwealth Club for having us, and excited for this conversation.
Well, it's funny too, and I think we forget maybe sometimes when we're in this room, we're talking about, we spend all day talking about infrastructure and data, and part of why we're here too is related to health outcomes, right?
Right.
I mean, and I know Kyle's really, your CEO is very interested in this topic as a fellow runner, right?
Fellow runner. I did 2.5 miles yesterday. He's run 7 marathons. So maybe not a fellow runner, but maybe a fellow runner to you.
Touche. Kyle, want to go for a run.
Yes, but that's one of the reasons that we started out very all electric from the start, because we know that transportation, the pollution aspect of that is one of the biggest faults of the transportation industry right now. As we continue to think from a city, state, and of course country level, moving towards the direction of being sustainable and electric, we sort of are already there for building the future of transportation for everyone and for the future. We're starting at a really good place. So it is something that's very near and dear to my heart, but especially based on my public health background and sort of thinking about the social determinants and of health as well. And I'm excited to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think, one of the things too is that because I have been an advocate for safe streets and slow streets, I think we sometimes get distracted by some of this idea of kind of the safety outcomes that we're really talking about. So maybe we can just use that as a springboard to talk about what we have learned. And I think maybe it's important to frame that, there are a couple, Cruise, there are a couple companies in this space that are really learning a lot about what it means. And we heard from Dan from Neuro earlier, and we've had Waymo on these panels in the past, and so we're learning a lot about self-driving operations. And from your perspective, kind of where are we in our learning, opportunities, challenges, how we lean into the future?
Sure. Well, it's a lot.
I
So
know.
we'll break it down.
Well, what have
break
we
it down.
learned? Just keep it simple.
We'll break it down. I think we're coming together at a really critical time right now because I think for so many of years we've just discussed the self-driving industry being so far out, so Jetson-like, in this sort of euphoric, utopic vision of the future of the world. But it's happening right now in the streets in and around us, and I think it's a really important time to talk about what we're doing from the industry, but obviously from Cruise's perspective. At Cruise, we've logged over 4 million miles since we've started. Many of you have hopefully been in a ride since we launched our public ridership program in June, where we've actually driven over 400,000 driverless miles with people of the public inside. And so what we're seeing is sort of an interesting convergence of obviously having the technology work as its will, and many of those miles are there, and then also ways in which to improve and iterate the technology moving forward as we continue to expand. The second kind of major component is really launching with communities and not at them. So that trust race is as important as the tech race, and even more so from Cruise's perspective. So really figuring out how to meet consumers where they are. I've been in riders with first-time riders for the last several months, and it is always the same sort of build of apprehension, excitement, and wonder as we enter the car, as they buckle to ride, since we have a buckle to ride safety policy before you can start the ride. And
then it's
fascination.
Unspectacularly spectacular.
Exactly. It's brilliantly boring, as they say. Because in the first 2 minutes, it's like, oh my gosh, the steering wheel's moving. Oh my gosh, we're taking an unprotected left and nothing's happening. Oh, they went around the double parked vehicle. And then it's like, so how's your day today?
Yeah.
And you completely forget about whatever is happening in the front seat and by the car. And that's a really fascinating moment to see it. And they walk out really different. It's one ride. It's not the several times over where we think about, particularly from the TNC world, we're teaching people to get into a car with a stranger when we were taught that as kids to not do so. The behavioral paradigm shift into teaching someone to get into a ride with no one, you would think would be like some huge monumental task. But it is really taking one ride for people to understand the brilliance and the magic and really starting to open up their eyes to what the benefits of this can offer.
Right. So, and we heard earlier, like just with our, I think we can talk about it. I mean, our students were, and many of you in the audience who participated in the Research Rider pilot, were some of these people that were early riders, and they really had these experiences. But one of them was, some of them were kind of really being feeling a lot empowered because they could go out in the evenings, in these off-peak hours where they felt like they didn't have the service they needed. But also they were looking at like this opportunity of not having, and we heard from Nathan earlier saying like we had students that were talking about like really feeling so great that they didn't have to feel pressured to drive after having a couple drinks or doing some of that, which is, we see questions a little bit about like, well, what's the difference between a rideshare? Well, safety number one, but then I think there's also the commitment in terms of what you're learning in terms of all green, right? And what you're doing from an electric vehicle standpoint.
Right. I think that's right. We saw from the studies that we partnered with you on, which is that 20% of those rides were for non-recreational, non-social purposes. So it was actually filling a different concept of not just being late night rides. So autonomous vehicles, we don't drive drunk, we're not distracted. We really can we follow the rules of the road, but it is also serving a functionality in day-to-day lives of these students that are really augmenting and improving their lives as well. But not to discount the opportunity that we're also learning about, where connectivity to transit is like 90% necessary from the study, or we think about how accessibility is so important. So with regards to sustainability, Cruise really feels like it's one of being able to be in a position of leadership and thought leadership.
Yeah.
Dave Rubin, who you work so closely with, is sort of the brains behind our Farm to Fleet initiative. So we are powered by renewable energy here in California, by those RECs from two farms in the Central Valley, really providing an economic empowerment opportunity for two farms that are hundreds of miles away. And it's something that's always kind of talked about when we think about technology and sort of bridging that urban and rural divide. And we are able to sort of critically, creatively think of solutions moving forward. So we're in a really fortunate and pretty cool spot.
Well, I think it draws the line too to something that Martin brought up earlier about like that we will get to a point with EV fleets and with EVs in general where we have to think about capacity, and the Cruise perspective has been, can we actually be part of the electric production side, which is when we think about kind of successes, I mean, that really is, kudos, Dave, wherever you are. I can't see you.
He's right.
But yeah, I mean, it's a really big win. But what about like this, I don't know if it's clickbait or what, but there's been some stuff in the news recently about, $5 billion in two companies and the car still stops in the road. Yeah. And I mean, so are we, I think we're there in terms of the tech, but what do these pain points mean and and how do we learn from them going forward? I think maybe you could describe some of the issues that you've faced out there in the roadways doing this experimentation.
Well, we can't really talk about the future until we take a step back and contextualize where we have been. So we think about the 40,000 traffic fatalities a year that are only continuing to rise, the highest that they've been in the last 16 years. We think about the transportation pollution and the carbon monoxide, CO2 emissions that we've been facing for decades. And then also, of course, the inaccessibility for many groups that have been plaguing the transportation industry. So really, that is sort of the motivating factors of what Cruise is behind. Driving down the fatalities, really improving the air in and around us, and providing an accessibility for particular communities that have not been afforded a transportation option. So with that, we use that with safety being the North Star. And so from the technology that we build, to the vehicle, to the operations, to ensuring that the passengers inside the vehicle are really being as safe as we possibly can. And I think that is something that is really important to talk about and to really vocalize. Because so often when we think about all those miles that I talked about, 4 million miles, over the 400,000 miles, the small pieces of the social media or the clickbait, I think as you said, are portions of time where that allow us to lean into what we can do better to iterate. And we're intentionally starting small, to be able to be more deliberate, to be more intentional, to understand the ways in which the technology can work. Because while we have driven all those miles and while we have done hundreds and hundreds and thousands of hours of simulation and plugging different ways of dynamic incidents that can occur into the vehicle, and the great thing about fleet management is if one car learns it, the entire fleet learns it. Yeah. But we're seeing different dynamic situations out there that are interesting and are going to be something that is going to happen in a dynamic urban environment like San Francisco. It's why we chose to start here. Yeah. Because if we can master, or at least be pretty close to mastering, one of the most unique, challenging streets of the United States, we can pretty much expand really quickly in other places. And that's what we're seeing in places like Austin and Phoenix, since we just announced.
Yeah, and I think there's been some issues too, where there's been some policy friction, from my understanding, where, for example, it's hard to pull over a lot of times as a commercial vehicle in a private driveway. I believe it's illegal, right? Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times people complain because of a double parked Cruise, but it is perfectly legal, right, for a vehicle to double park in, yes, particularly if it can't find a safe location to drop off a passenger.
Correct. And so, there is a law under CVC that allows for commercially plated vehicles to double park for a reasonable period of time. So that's why you see, sometimes Cruise cars, the default is to look for a pickup or drop off point at the curb. That is where the default is. Who all has driven in San Francisco, how often do we find
a vacant curb
availability? But that is an opportunity then to have a conversation about redesigning curbs and thinking about urban planning and thinking about what goes into the concept of future of transportation, really providing an opportunity for cities like San Francisco and others beyond. If we're going to have the future of transportation, how do we build around it and around people? And thinking about ingress, egress. So we actually have improved 3x our pickup and drop off since the beginning of the year, which I think is fantastic, not only because we want to be better, but also we've heard from consumers.
Right.
You know, they want to be dropped off close to their destination. Think about if you, as a woman, I have 2 daughters, I'm thinking about sending my children out into San Francisco in a few years, many years, and I don't want them to be dropped off around the block. I would like them to be dropped off in front of their destination so that something can be watching them to go into that destination. And so we're hearing that over and over again, and we continue to kind of iterate the technology to be able to provide that.
We, you know, Dave was actually in some of, David Rubin was in some of these things where we even heard feedback from some of our student writers about, well, what happens when I'm not quite comfortable right at my destination? Like maybe there's, you know, a person standing there that I'm not quite comfortable like getting out, and we heard this from one female rider in our program that was like, maybe I could actually tell the car, and actually what the female rider didn't realize, that all she had to do was press the button on the ceiling and talk to there's always a live operator available, and they could have maybe dropped her a little further down the street.
Exactly. And that 24/7, you know, at a touch of a button, you know, customer support is going to be there, whether it's the Bolt or our future of transportation, the Origin.
Yeah.
So I don't know if
well, let's get to the Origin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
I'll listen to you.
I mean, I had a situation in Cricket that was the same. Cricket is my friend. So all the vehicles have names.
They do have names.
So Cricket and I had a moment in the inner sunset. I was not a participant in my own research, but I did some writing, and I'm telling you what,
not biased.
Cricket had a little meltdown. But quickly recovered after the attendant, or I don't know what the name is, but they called me and said, remote assistant said, is everybody okay? And I said, yeah, we're fine. Cricket's just having a little moment to himself or herself. I don't know.
That's actually a good point. Let's talk a little bit about those vehicle retrieval events or moments of pause. So remote assistance is sort of the assistant on the other side of the vehicle. So the vehicle makes all of its decisions based on the sensor suite, LiDARs, cameras, and radars. And so it takes all of that ingesting of data, makes decisions on its own. But it does when it encounters situations where it is unfamiliar or needs confirmation, it pings back to the remote assistance, which is available to say, hey, is that like a debris? Is that a person in the middle of the road? Is that construction zone? Is it okay to safely pass? And that remote assistance is sort of providing breadcrumbs as in terms of a routing in and around that area. It's the decisions to pull out of a particular lane, that's being done by the vehicle. So right now, as intended, the design is when situations come up with the vehicles that they are unfamiliar with, or that it is outside of what has been approved for us to do by the state of California. Think of heavy rain or heavy fog. The vehicle is doing what it's designed to do. It's pulling over into what we say a minimal risk condition or a controlled safe stop. And it'll look for that curb availability. Oftentimes we know it doesn't exist. And so you will see cars, every so often being pulled with hazards on and being waited for a field support team to come out and retrieve the car. So we call them vehicle retrieval events. We are working to minimize how often those happen, but as designed, the car is doing what it's supposed to do when it's encountering something it's unfamiliar with. Let's pull over and let's not proceed until we know what we're dealing with. So that's usually what you're seeing in some of these larger kind of social media events, is that there is a ping back to their RA, and maybe there is a situation where there's a couple of cars that are coming up behind it, and they can be for a whole different root cause in terms of technology. There's oftentimes multiple cascading compounding effects that make that vehicle, stop in place. But there is a team that is, in the neighborhood, roving team, as we say, and they're going to come and pick them up really quickly and remove them. And so we're working from an engineering side and from operational side to minimize how often that happens and really drive down that rate.
Yeah, and this abuts a lot of where kind of your adherence to safety and our existing policy norms necessarily haven't evolved to the technology too. And we've seen this, I think, with a couple emergency vehicle events where the car is abiding by the rules of the road, but there are situations that are complete corner cases that the car has to make a judgment. Do I break one law and run a red light or yield to this, let this emergency vehicle by. I think there's a situation like that, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. There's still computers making these decisions, whereas we'll have these sort of like ethical discussions in our head as we're making these like risk trade-offs, right? So similarly, the vehicle is having to have a conversation, like what's the risk viability if I go this way versus if I go this way, and they're calculating it in their heads. But one of the ways in which I think we can like help improve that is, of course, our continued testing and our continuous improvement that we're so committed to, but also, really working with the cities in and around us, talking to having collaborative dialogues of like pathways to different emergency sites, kind of pinging back our communication if there's a situation where we can do better and can say, hey, we're having a little bit of an issue here. If there's a first responder that has to come this way, maybe they just go the street around it.
Well, we spent a long time talking about data in the last panel, and I think what I'm hearing you say is that this emergency response data, if you could get more access to it, you could have advanced knowledge or advanced anticipation.
I think it's always great to have like the data piece, but I don't want to discount the fact that these are dynamic situations too, right? So we're not always going to see the fire engine going down Gulf Street, right? We're going to see it go and make unique choices, just like we are going to have to make them in terms of the routability as well. So I do think that there's an iterative play there, but I think the larger global concept I think we both agree on is there has to be more of a dialogue with how we figure that out.
Yeah, and there has to be a place to have that dialogue. So I think that's really important. I mean, I think so when we look at kind of this idea of kind of what the future should look like, a big part of your dialogue has been around this cruise origin. And I think that paints a different vision than what we see driving around San Francisco streets. So maybe you could talk about that vision.
Yeah.
I've seen the Origin. It's a pretty cool car. I don't know if you call it a car.
We call it a vehicle.
It's a vehicle.
We call it a vehicle. So Cruise has come up with our partners, Honda and GM, and created a full future of transportation that we are calling the Cruise Origin. It is about the size of a Chevy Tahoe, no steering wheel, no driver console. It's subway-style doors, seats 6 in sort of a fireside chat.
Yeah, there we go.
Campfire seating, I should say, that really allows for room as well as some community building as well. It is something you've never seen before, but really something that we feel is, again, all electric from the start, has a 1 million-mile battery, and also is something that is going to be game-changing for the future of transportation. We are also, one of the first to really explore a mobility variant for those who have fixed wheelchairs. So we're calling it the Origin for Mobility. We're looking into how to work with members of the disabled community from a wheelchair perspective, understand curb height, understand where they can anchor in, and really build a different kind of car or vehicle that has not been otherwise done before, and something to really critically serve the needs of a community that has not been has an option before.
Yeah, and this is something that we did our lab here did some research on last year in terms of really exploring the accessible autonomous vehicle future, and it's a huge need because, as I think we heard in the first panel, it's really hard to provide these paratransit services, but it's also hard to meet but also exceed our federal code. And I think what we're seeing is some of these vehicles that are purpose-built for handicap accessibility can not only meet CFR, I don't remember the CFR, but they can only meet, but they can exceed it.
Yes, and I think, we talk about a little bit of how the federal government is playing into this too. Even with a concept like the Origin, we do have to seek out permission from the federal government through NHTSA to sort of work to understand how our vehicle works and how it can be exempted from certain regulations, like the fact that it doesn't have a steering wheel. You have to petition for an exemption for that. You don't have a human, pressing on the accelerator because there is no need for the accelerator with no one driving. And so we've actually completed a request for petition comment period in late September, and we're working with NHTSA in and of itself to get that origin
we're
approved.
not going to wonk out on acronyms again.
Yeah.
NHTSA is...
The National Highway Safety Transportation Authority, agency. I should get that. Administration. Dave for the win. Always
All
Dave
right,
for the win.
the audience clarifies. So NHTSA, you've sought this NHTSA approval, but I believe there's another, when we're talking about this kind of like, what are the barriers here? There's another barrier towards these innovative transit platforms, which I believe is capacity to scale, right? Isn't under the exception, I believe there's a cap.
That's right.
Is that correct?
That's right. So under this exemption cap, so once you receive the exemptions, you're only allowed to make 2,500 per year per manufacturer, and that is sunsets after 2 years.
So if we wanted this ideal shared transit future to supplement our existing transit routes, there would still be this limitation that nationwide, we can only produce how many?
2,500 per year per manufacturer for only 2 years.
Okay,
so,
but is that also exported as well?
So no, that's not exported per se as well. We do have partnerships with Japan and Dubai that are really interested in looking at the origin, so that wouldn't necessarily be applicable there. But I do think that the piece to that is really important because once you put it into commercial, the stream of commerce here in the United States, that's really is when you need those exemptions and also when you need to abide by that cap. And the only way to change that cap is by
legislation. Okay.
By legislative authority. And so really, as we think about sort of where we are from the federal landscape and really what the policy considerations that are of priority in the federal landscape, not many people are paying attention to autonomous vehicles, but they should. And they should because as we think about competition with other countries and around ourselves, we really need to start building the future of technology in this country.
And you could say it's vehicle innovation, right? Like, so if we want to get creative about mobility, it may not just be platforms like the Origin. It may be other.
That's right.
I've seen a lot of dialogue on other lightweight platforms that would be radically experimental as well. And so maybe we need to rethink some of these policies that rethink, the vehicles that OEMs are producing in general and what is approved. So.
That's right.
So when we were thinking about this Cruise Origin and kind of this idealized future, like what is this optimal kind of outcome and kind of what should that future look like from just in terms of operations in a city? And is there this idea that we can have, I think we'd heard from about this Treasure Island pilot that's happening with the San Francisco County Transportation Authority. Is there an opportunity where we have a public and a private sector operator that kind of share the load or share the burden or the benefit of our transit system?
Mm-hmm. I do think that there is an opportunity, especially with fleet managed systems, to have more of that private-public partnership. Because we're incentivized differently than sort of the ride-sharing models that we've come to be. We're not really the fleet isn't necessarily incentivized to drive a longer trip or to drive to a certain place because it's not earning the money.
Yeah,
right?
it's an own fleet, right?
So that we actually can partner in a meaningful way with public agencies to really provide that connectivity to mass transit, to understand where the gaps are in the routes, to provide different times of day. And so I do think it's really part of this larger ecosystem where autonomous vehicles can fit in a very much more collaborative way than from my history, like the more adversarial way that has come to be with the TNCs. And so I do think that there's an opportunity here when we think about what our ideal look is in the global world is being able to provide, all green, all accessible, vehicles to individuals to get them to and from other options, to other places, et cetera. That is sort of like the utopic vision because then you're also driving down the potential fatalities and the injuries when you're putting autonomous vehicles into the road and not having a lot more of that human-driven behavior.
Yeah, and you're also getting to these. We intro in our dean talked to us a little bit about kind of how we actually achieve these high-level goals of sustainability and achieve our UN SDGs, but also it relates to a lot of the financial models that are in her background and that Martin talked about, where, when you own the asset, your unit economics are a lot different than if you're just actually just paying a driver to drive around, which is what the traditional rideshare or transportation network company didn't really care about, the wear and tear on the vehicle and the rubber tire pollutants and things like that, because I think that they were not incentivized to do that. They didn't own the asset. So, so I think when we think about this optimized future, I think the question is like, so how do we get there? It's like, what do we need to do to see these scenarios happen? And we asked the first panel kind of, what kinds of collaborations and partnerships do we need to see? What type of investment from both the public sector and the civic sector need to happen to really achieve these optimal, like urban, maybe suburban, maybe even rural outcomes? What do we need to do to get to utopia?
Well,
I just asked you like a fundamental,
I know. Fundamentally
complicated,
$1,000,000 question. And I hope we can dialogue about this. Yes. I think there's a few pieces to this, right? We can think about urban planning and we can think about infrastructure related pieces, because there's, as we move towards all electric, how do we continue to ensure that the grid can really maintain all of this charging? We think about providing more public charging, and then we have private charging. Then you think about the weird, complicated dynamics that are playing out here in the city of San Francisco, or in which you have ordinances that are sort of pushing out what that charging looks like into certain parts of San Francisco, putting more of a burden on other, substations that don't have the funding to be upgraded. You think about all of these different pieces. So really taking a holistic look at what infrastructure looks like, urban planning looks like, and thinking about how to move that forward. I think the second piece to that is never losing sight of how people need to be brought along with this. It is about education. It is about integration. It is about listening. And I think that is so fundamental into how people not only build trust with the technology, but also build trust with the company providing that technology. And it's market driven, right? It's market by market. So what works in San Francisco is not going to necessarily work in Austin, Texas, which is not going to necessarily work in Chicago, Illinois. So really getting in early and often and starting to talk about what their gaps and what the solutions is that you can come up with. And it has to be, you always think about like cookie cutter, like playbooks for every market. That doesn't necessarily work when you're bringing something so new and different to a market that has different needs, has fundamentally different ways of thinking and ways of getting around. And so I think that is something that we need to bring people forward. We also need to meet them where they're at, and then start to build that future together. So I think those two things are going to need to be fundamentally there, and maybe we'll get at least halfway to utopia.
I think we will get almost there.
Yeah.
So we're a little out of time, but do you have anything else that you would like to add? Just kind of final thoughts, or?
I'm super passionate about this access, particularly to underserved communities, those who have been historically marginalized communities of color. That's why I've been in this space for so long. And so I think it's a really cool opportunity in a really reliable, affordable, and a safe way to get in and around. And the only thing I would say is that I hope you get to enjoy it once or twice or multiple times in the coming weeks ahead. I have another colleague here who sort of works on our ride hail business unit. I'm put him on the spot to ensure that you all somehow get a ride. His name's Andrew, right in back. And I do think, because when you have that moment where you sit there and you can experience what the future looks like, it is life-changing. And so I really hope you get a chance to do that. Otherwise, go to getcruise.com and you can sign up there.
So, we do have a couple questions I think we have time for, if that's okay.
Sure.
So one of the questions that I think that we've hit on this a little bit with your ownership models, but so when we think about kind of what happened with rideshare and with kind of rideshare really taking doing two things: increasing the whole transportation pie, so like providing a lot more access for what we defined earlier as this kind of latent demand, the demand that existed and wasn't served, but also kind of really when transit was less efficient, wasn't reliable and convenient, it gobbled up those trips. And so if we think about the future of how the origin might come out and how Cruise is kind of putting itself forward as a company, and maybe it's not just Cruise, maybe it's other companies, so we don't have to do that, but how do we actually make sure that we don't actually bankrupt transit, that we have a collaborative approach going forward?
I think, not to like high level the question a bit, but I do fundamentally think that like the dialogue is important, because I think the importance is understanding like where those gaps are.
Yeah.
And that's how we're able to fill it and start to build that partnership and trust model. And maybe there's something else that we can start to incentivize, because sometimes it's just like getting to mass transit, right? Think about that first mile, last mile solution so often that plagues the transportation industry. Is it that? Is it some other way that we can do that? And so I think that dialogue is important. We've started to sort of uncover some issues, even in the OWN San Francisco agency conversations that we've started to talk. We started to kind of think about and at least start to surface. And once you start to surface those problems, we have really incredible brains at Cruise and otherwise in the industry that can think about things in a really different way and are powered by tech.
And I think that one thing I'll add too is it's simple to say have the dialogue, but sometimes you need a safe space to have the crucial conversation. Right. And that's one of the things we've really tried to do with this conference, is really to try to bring public and private sector individuals together to have those crucial conversations, because sometimes it's not easy to have a conversation where you're on somebody else's turf and you think they're going to behave just like all those rotten situations that were super thorny and wicked, and you think like, oh, they're just out to get me and to make a quick buck. And I do think that if you start with that, we start with that norm, it's really hard to get over that and to see an optimal or an optimized outcome.
Right.
So, I think that was a good place to end. And just take a breath, Prashanti. You've been on the spot for a while, but I think what I want to do is just kind of wrap us up with a couple thoughts, which is we've really had a nice arc today, and I think one of the things that really was great that you brought up was urban planning and land use. And our Dutchman in the room, Martin, actually hit the nail on the head when he said it is about land use and housing, and he brought up this idea of Amsterdam going car-free. And I think the thing that we see in a lot of U.S. cities that we've been unable to make the decision with land use and housing that actually enables the transportation infrastructure we want to see. So I love that you mentioned that, and that it's cool that Cruise has staff that are thinking about this, and I know the city has staff that are thinking about this, but it really is. It's important for us as citizens and voters and to really emphasize this idea, and to emphasize that our own choices and the way we kind of live our lives, but also who we elect that make these decisions about how we're going to use our urban spaces is really important. And it's also important just from an electrification standpoint. You talked a little bit about the grid, and we talked about that earlier. But we can't do a lot of these shared scenarios unless we make the land use choices first, and the decision to put housing in the right place, and the decision to pay for that kind of optimization or that type of transit optimization. And then, the last thing I'll say is exactly what we talked about, which is you have to be open to the experimentation as a city. In my book that came out this year, we talked about London as a city of experimentation, but I do see now San Francisco and California has really become particularly an experimentation hotbed for autonomous driving, and that's super exciting. We've made a lot of strides, and there's more to be made, but education and communication and working through some of these thorny, wicked problems is going to be increasingly important to really achieve some of these broader sustainability goals we have as a society. So thank you all. We really appreciate it. I have a list of people that I want to thank, but first, this Commonwealth Club space, we really appreciate the Commonwealth Club for hosting us here. Prashanti, you were very kind and thanked them before we started, but I want to thank them again for hosting us. They're great partners for a lot of the events that we do. And I want to thank you all for helping sponsor this event. Waymo and Planetizen and Atmos also helped out with making this event happen. And then the people in the room that are benefiting today from this forum, this would only happen because of the support of our dean, but also our staff. And so our staff deserve the most. I couldn't do what I do without Danielle and Tanya and Sabrina, Nathan, who helps out. Actually, Nathan works for the campus, who you heard from earlier. But so thank you. Let's give the Commonwealth Club and our staff a big hand. And then I have a little announcement after that. So, again, we really appreciate everybody that's online. Appreciate you spending your afternoon with us, or wherever you are. It could be your evening or your morning. And all of you in the room, thank you for coming out. We do this every year, and it just seems to. I always think we can't do it again. But it just gets better because the conversation gets richer and more important. And so I hope that you all will come back next year when we do this again. We would like to invite all of you here. Sorry, those in the audience you missed, or online you missed out. We're going to go up to the roof. We've got a nice kind of a happy hour planned for you. So we'd like to invite you up to have a beverage with us and to network. So thank you very much for being here, and I wish you all the best. And I think the message is very clear to vote tomorrow. All right, cheers. Thank you.